God, Buddha, Lord Adlagna. I swear that for the rest of my life I will never call out anyone's name. A roaring, piercingly cold wind enveloped the entire unrivaled glacier. Even clad in thick winter gear, Subaru tasted the piercing chill of the air, desperately prying open his vision, which threatened to fog over with his own white breath, and looked ahead. If the cold had been Subaru's only adversary, there would have been countless other layers he could have worn. But the true enemy they had to face here was not the blowing wind or the snow. It was a threat much, much more explicit, one that was thrusting a blade directly at their lives. Are you scared, I wonder? Hearing that sudden question, Subaru grew conscious of the sensation of her soft hand. The warm heat he had felt in his left hand, which had remained firmly clasped in hers, belonged to the greatest partner, one made of nothing but trust and affection, who would never abandon me no matter how dire the predicament. Nah, I could pack in countless other positive feelings like protectiveness, cuteness, and passion too. I'm completely out of words to sing your praises. But of course, in fact, much as I'd love to listen to those lacking words of yours for as long as time permits. We have a bit of a nuisance right now, I suppose. Yeah. Geez, I knew this was coming, but I wish he'd give us a break. Agreeing with his adorable partner, Subaru shrugged, keeping his eyes fixed straight ahead, even as they exchanged banter. He continued to pour his unwavering vigilance into the entity standing there. Honestly, no matter how much tension and caution he poured out, it would never be enough against this opponent. I'm not sure how I feel about still using this as a measuring stick, but compared to how insane you are, Regulus is practically cute. No, not cute. Regulus is like a flea. I shall take that as, and accept it as, a special commendation from you. Subaru closed one eye at the opponent who had picked up my grumbling with his sharp ears and dutifully replied. His relaxed stance, his highly trained, tall frame clad in magnificent attire, the glint in his eyes that demonstrated a posture of carrying out a terrifyingly strong will, and his dark skin that looked slightly burnt by the snow. Faintly surfacing on that skin were mysterious tattoos resembling Sanskrit characters. The man, who looked like anything but an ordinary person, was unmistakably no ordinary person. At the very least, even if one scoured the entirety of the current world, there would be absolutely no one who could defeat him. People called him the Mad Prince. That was the formidable enemy we were confronting now in the massive glacier, where a bitterly cold storm swirled. Confrontation. Huh! Why the hell do we have to fight each other? A soliloquy. If it is a genuine question, then I must question the very attitude of you questioning it. As to the why, I believe I have already exchanged more than enough words with you both, and upon doing so, negotiations broke down. Hence, we find ourselves here. This is truly regrettable for me as well. Regrettable? And why is that? I harbor neither grudge nor hatred towards you. The reason you and I must face each other like this has nothing to do with any mutual affinity or animosity. It is simply, saying that, the Mad Prince paused, narrowing his eyes and lowering his gaze slightly. With that, Subaru realized his line of sight had shifted from him to the partner at his side. In an instant, a thick, viscous, unextinguishable hatred leaked from him. It was certainly an emotion the Mad Prince would never direct at Subaru, his actual opponent. Furthermore, it was the absolute reason why that man and him could never see eye to eye. Oozing that unhidden hatred, the Mad Prince declared. When it comes to that filth, you and I are incompatible. First off, I absolutely cannot understand your aesthetic sense, treating my super cute partner like dirt. That's exactly why you and I can't be friends. It is incredibly regrettable. Because it is regrettable, it is endlessly regrettable. Though regrettably, I will not back down. Slowly shaking his head, the Mad Prince sighed as if lamenting his failure to persuade the two. However, if he had actually thought that counted as an attempt at persuasion, the gulf between their values would never be bridged. He truly is impossible to talk to, in fact. Even Cecilus was easier to reason with, I suppose. It's unfair to Cece to compare them. You could actually have a proper conversation with Cece. It's just that the conclusion of the talk would always selfishly land exactly where Cece wanted it. It feels like the logic of the strong. But we cannot allow him to force that, in fact. You know this, I suppose. Yeah, goes without saying. Though hearing you say it gets me even more fired up. Subaru gave the hand he was holding a tight squeeze and exchanged a brief glance and a smile. Facing down a formidable enemy, the sense of solidarity with his partner was absolute. And then the reason they had selected this location as our battlefield, and spent so much time talking arrived without warning. It was at the edge of his vision, a prism of absolute ice that I felt flash for merely an instant. EMM. In that moment, their overlapping voices triggered the incantation, and the absolute defense magic enveloped Subaru and his partner, shifting their existence half a step out of this world to nullify all interference. Passing right through their blurred physical forms and shooting out the other side was a white light that had mercilessly sought to blow right through them below the knees. If they hadn't blocked it, the two of them standing side by side would have had their legs shot through simultaneously, rendering them unable to fight. As well, it had aimed for the Mad Prince in the exact same manner, but was that your full strength, or are you simply trying to anger me? If this is a provocation, you will suffer the consequences, you know. The one delivering them will be me, and the one suffering them will be you. As he spoke, the Mad Prince caught the white light, pinching it between two raised fingers. The light slowly lost its radiance at the man's fingertips, eventually exposing the true form of a single long needle, which then shattered and dissipated into mist. A needle constructed of magic, fired at hypersonic speeds. It was known as Hell's Snipe, which means, it's you again, you just don't learn. No matter how many times you come, the result is the same. As that voice abruptly rained down from the sky above, Subaru's breath caught in his throat. The wind was still howling fiercely even now. Despite that, he wondered why, even in such a gale, did that voice rattle his eardrums so clearly? Or perhaps the logic of the strong possessed the power to pin down and subjugate even the laws of nature. If that were the case, it made perfect sense that her voice could cut through the blizzard and reach us. After all, the entity who had appeared so casually in the sky above this unparalleled glacier, she was. It's been a while, Witch of Tristitia. Are you in good health? Could you not talk to me like we know each other? I'm not your friend or a casual acquaintance or anything of the sort. Whether I'm well or not shouldn't matter to you at all. Not entirely, not entirely. For you see, at present you and this young man here are definite obstacles to achieving my goal. If there is a season of poor health for you, I would certainly like to capitalize on it. Oh, is that so? Then if I were to spread a false rumor that I was in a terrible slump, would you gullibly swallow it and leap right in? Amazing, go die. Clapping her hands together lightly in front of her chest, the woman floating in the freezing sky smiled cruelly. She was a beautiful woman. Her long, reddish-brown hair was tied up with a ribbon, and she wore a dress patterned with a unique design that blended multiple colors: pink, light blue, and gold. That outfit, which exposed her pale, slender shoulders, was unbelievably thin for an absolutely freezing glacial zone. But to her, who didn't even have visible white breath, it didn't seem to be an impediment at all. Just as the roaring blizzard could not drown out the beautiful timbre slipping from her lips, neither heat nor cold nor bad weather could hinder what she wanted to do, or the attire she wished to wear. She's here, in fact. That call snapped back his consciousness, which had swallowed hard and stiffened in response. Looking up at the same opponent, his partner, who had surely arrived at the exact same state of mind, was desperately holding back her overflowing emotions out of consideration for Subaru's feeling. Subaru didn't feel pathetic or apologetic about being cared for like that. He simply took a deep breath, deciding that he must not let her precious kindness go to waste. And then, we finally meet again. Raising his voice, Subaru called out to her, standing beyond the white, hazy wind. Unfortunately, unlike her or the Mad Prince, he didn't possess any techniques to pin down the wind. Besides, he absolutely refused to do something as incredibly lame as repeating himself just because this voice, which he had saved and saved for this exact moment, failed to reach her. Just how long had I yearned for this moment? Just how much powerlessness had I tasted, trampled over and overcome to make it this far? Seeking the culmination of it all, Natsuki Subaru inhaled and stared right at that person. Staring at her, he spoke. I'm taking you back. Bring it on. Oh, inevitable fate. That was the culmination of the reasons behind the long stretch of time Natsuki Subaru had spent to set foot on this freezing land, a declarative settling of accounts for the days he had resolved to sacrifice everything. God, Buddha, Lord Lagna, I swear that for the rest of my life I will never shoulder the burden of anyone else's life. It was dark, dull. He continued to drift in a dark abyss, vague as a slumber, uncertain as eternity, scattered like mire. He drifted through a never-ending darkness, one so vague, uncertain, and scattered that it felt like lingering forever on the borderline between the pages of dreams and reality within a single book. Just how long had I been like this? Just how much longer would I be like this? Just how far would this endlessly persisting instant continue? Even those natural thoughts, questions, and propositions were stretched thin by the darkness. Stretched out, they were like flimsy tissue paper. Just poking them a little too hard would easily tear them, obscuring the seams until they eventually lost their original shape entirely. He had surely repeated that countless times already, scraping together his dissipating consciousness, gathering it up, stitching it together, only to easily smash through it with the slightest exertion of force, shattering it into scattered pieces all over again. He should have just stopped trying to piece together something that had broken so many times he'd lost count. And yet he couldn't. It was dark, dark, dull. He was still adrift in the dark abyss. Vague as a slumber, uncertain as eternity, scattered like mire. He continued to drift in a darkness where he was absolutely never alone. He was not alone. He would not be alone. The reason he was not alone held back the stretched-out instants, the endlessly repeating failures, the continuous drifting in darkness, refusing to let him fade away into nothingness. Even though his own definition of self was incomplete, and the proof that he wasn't alone was shrouded in black mist, even so, he couldn't throw it away, couldn't let go, couldn't give up. He couldn't give up, because giving up just doesn't suit him. And so, the instant his vision cleared and he was tossed out into the outside world, his mind was violently scrambled by a surging flood of information, and his body writhed fiercely. His vision flickered erratically, as a contrast of red and black alternately violated the world. His extended limbs tensed up tight, and the abuse inflicted upon his body, stripped of its unconscious brakes, horrifyingly caused the muscles in every single joint, from the tips of his fingers to their very bases, to spasm one after another. Pain, a pain that reached every corner of his mind and body, seized both flesh and spirit, refusing to let go. It completely burned out, and now, wait, is this okay? Is that so? He's totally flopping like a fish out of water, I suppose so? Silence. Lumela. No matter how absurdly adorable your appearance may be, I do not recall permitting you to shriek in my ear. In the first place, this is the expected result. Expected? Your Excellency, did you just say expected? Did you know this was going to happen? My yang sword burns what I wish to burn, and cuts what I wish to cut. That being said, given that it was manifested without following the proper procedures, one cannot deny that certain inconveniences would arise. Did you friggin' mention that beforehand? You should all be capable of understanding something of this level without me having to tell you. You are all, every single one of you, older than I am, as wise yet young as I may be. Or did you all line up and slack off on life? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. Swallowed by a muddy current of all the information his five senses were catching, his consciousness was forced to churn as those voices flew back and forth above his head. Those voices were also new information. In other words, they were just another piece of the surging current. Bad, bad, bad. If he just dies like this, all my years of hard work will go down the drain, I suppose so? I ran all over the place, rubbed my forehead against the dirt countless times, and finally managed to pull this together. Ooh-ah, I won't be able to look anyone in the eye. This is no time for complaining. In a situation like this, yes, a drastic cure. A little pain is easily brushed off and elegant so long as the results are there. I'm certain Master will smile and praise me for a job well done. That's it. Can you do it, Miss Lumela? Super impossible. I'm so fiery, I'm strictly fire attribute. The only part of destruction and rebirth that flames can handle is the destruction part. Oh ho 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 ho. Are we seriously just completely wasting time right now? With a clamor, exceptionally noisy information darted right and left, even amidst the flood and muddy currents. As Subaru felt the roaring exchanges flying back and forth over him, mixed in with the physical and mental pain, he acquired the information of a slowly approaching threat. Suffocation. His stomach lining spasmed, and the tube serving as his airway began to close up due to internal contractions. It was a tragedy brought about by the unnatural writhing of his body, but what waited at the end was a comedy no one would laugh at. His body, already debilitated from extreme exhaustion, was losing function due to respiratory failure. And yet, scrambled by the overwhelming amount of information, he couldn't find a single way to fix it right now. Are you lots really fine continuing to make such a racket? This fool is on the verge of death, you know. Since he is a man I've never met, his death would cause me no pain nor itch whatsoever, but I assume the same cannot be said for the rest of you. No, that's absolutely entirely true, but we've poured pretty much every last drop of our resources right up to our limits into this, so we don't have any leeway either, you see. How about we just stick him back inside that sphere from earlier? Is that a no? Of course it is, understood. Resolved that on your own at high speed, did you? An entertaining man. I suppose so. Even with my radiance, there is nothing I can do for a dying clown. But this one is a different story. What are you gonna friggin' do? Fool. Why are you looking at me as if this is someone else's problem? Cloud Dragon? Never mind that man over there. This lovely girl right here surely has something she can do. Unable to cope, the agony mounted, mounted, and mounted. Everything was painted over by that agony, that pain, those spasms, and the instant that was supposed to have been stretched out for eternity came down upon him, blanketing him in a heavy, sinking end. At this rate, is this where it ends? Subaru? In that instant, another piece of information struck his darkening, closing consciousness. However, this time, it was not something that merely prolonged the pain and agony. It was something that wiped away pain with pain, agony with agony, information with information, and then you can't die, in fact. Don't you dare die. Because that information, that agony, that pain, was something precious that he knew so very well. His writhing stomach lining, his closing throat, his tangled tongue, his flickering vision, his consciousness that had nearly been swallowed by the instant, his life that was supposed to scatter into the dark beyond. They all halted. Don't let go of anything. Don't throw everything away. Cling to the world. I have to do that. I have to be able to do that, because only by doing that. OEO, Subaru. The flickering, obnoxious red and black lights vanished, and he saw teary eyes illuminated by the backlight. Eyes with characteristic butterfly-shaped patterns, a beloved voice calling his name, a massive presence in a tiny body doing everything in her power to hold back his scattering existence. Eco. Yes, in fact. That's right, I suppose. You're fine. I'm right by your side. With a body completely robbed of freedom, with a fragile, numb, and battered heart, he still spun the words, to prove his own self, and to tell her that he remembered her. She would accept them. Yes, just like walking across the bridge of trust with his eyes closed. No matter what happens or how things turn out, you and Betty can pull through it, Subaru. Holding firmly onto those reliable, reassuring words, his consciousness cut out. That was the resumption of Natsuki Subaru's journey, the events of his very first day back. God, Buddha, Lord Adlagna, I swear that for the rest of my life, I will never look back on yesterday. When Subaru's eyelids faintly opened, the first thing that jumped into his vision was an unfamiliar ceiling. Oa. Subaru tried to vocalize what he saw, but his bone-dry mouth and terribly raspy throat refused to produce a proper sound. All he could manage was an ugly groan. It was like the death rattle of a crushed frog. However, you're awake, I suppose. You're quite the sleepyhead. What a bad boy. In fact, it served well enough to convey that to the person waiting by his bedside for him to wake up. A small hand gently reached out, tickling his forehead along with his bangs. Squinting at the ticklish sensation, he looked over to see a young girl softly lowering the corners of her eyes. Beatrice, her unchanging figure, her unchanging gaze, her unchanging warmth were right there. Unmistakably, without a single inch of difference, it was Beatrice, looking exactly as she was burned into Subaru's consciousness. Ko. Yes, it is undoubtedly Betty, I suppose. There's no need to worry, so you mustn't push yourself, in fact. Right now, the wiring between your mind and body is completely scrambled, leaving you as helpless as can be, I suppose. Huh. Subaru hadn't actually tried to do anything reckless enough to be told not to. He merely wanted to sit up, scoop Beatrice into his arms following the welling emotions, dash right out of the room just like that, and spin around and around together in a wide open space. But it seemed even that was asking too much of his current state, the wiring between mind and body, as Beatrice had metaphorically put it. Oh, in reality it seemed to be a fact that Subaru's brain had forgotten how to move his body. He could only catch sight of Beatrice because she barely fit into the edge of his unmoving field of vision. Let alone his fingers, even his eyeballs refused to roll the way he wanted them to. Forget sitting up. It felt like a miracle that he was even managing to breathe. Perhaps he should be glad his heart hadn't forgotten how to beat. It's surprisingly no laughing matter, in fact. While we were trapped inside there, leaving Betty aside, Your life functions had almost entirely ceased, I suppose, to the point where your body forgot how to do the most natural things, in fact. That space, it was an outrageous thing woven from yin magic unknown to Betty, I suppose. It was undoubtedly touched by Mother's hands, in fact. Why that man had mastered a forbidden art created by Mother is an endless mystery, I suppose. I have no intention of debating this with you, in fact. No matter what you say to Betty, Mother is Mother. An irreplaceable person, I suppose. In fact. The faltering interjections slipping in were nothing but his raspy breaths. Yet Beatrice received them, establishing a conversation with outstanding comprehension, and on top of that, keeping her hand on his forehead, she puffed out her cheeks in displeasure and turned her face away with a hemph. That sight of her, unable to lean entirely toward either affection or dissatisfaction, was overwhelmingly adorable. But is that conversation really working? To me, it just looks like Miss Beatrice is getting all emotional completely on her own. That voice he suddenly heard belonged to a third party, who was neither Subaru nor Beatrice. In his vision, Beatrice looked toward my feet where he lay with a huff, so the owner of the voice seemed to be standing over there. However, unfortunately, he had no means of looking in that direction. Toward that unseen person, with her cheeks still puffed out, Beatrice replied, "Don't say such rude things, I suppose. For one, the bond between Subaru and Betty is infinite. Betty can see right through to what Subaru wants to say just by looking into his eyes, in fact. I see, as expected of a spiritual arts user and his contracted spirit, right? I have quite a few spirit-related folks around me, but that sort of thing is hard for an outsider to grasp intuitively. Others aside, the relationship between Betty and Subaru is one of a kind, I suppose. Well, any contracted spirit would think the same. So you'd do well not to act like you know what you're talking about, in fact. Yes, thanks for the advice. Whoops, is it all right if I give my greetings now?" Saying that, the person beyond his feet seemed to seek Beatrice's permission to introduce himself. Beatrice let out a small sigh at the request, then looked at Subaru with her large eyes. In response to her checking if it was all right for him to greet Subaru, he nodded with his feelings. "Ooh, I'll grace you with my presence since I have no choice. Be grateful is what he says, I suppose. Well, aren't I thankful for that? That stubborn mouth of his is just as I heard, seriously." Saying that, the owner of the voice approached, his heavy footsteps treading the floor. His tone felt somewhat familiar, but he didn't recognize the voice itself. He had no choice but to welcome the approach of such a person while completely at their mercy, like a fish on a chopping block. As Beatrice slowly pulled back, he saw the face of the person who casually intruded into the newly freed space in my vision. It was the face of an unknown mild-mannered man with a slightly androgynous look, wearing green-themed clothing and a large hat, with wavy gray hair. "Hello, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Natsuki Subaru. My name is Nicholas Suin. I hold various titles, but I suppose merchant is the most recognizable." The mild-mannered man with the lowered corners of his eyes, Nicola Suin, introduced himself as such. At the familiarly sounding family name, Suin, Subaru's eyes widened. However, as if to spur on his surprise and confusion, he didn't stop. "I'm sure you're surprised by all this so suddenly, but while you can barely move your body, I'll cruelly share something even more shocking. Roughly 400 years have passed since you were sealed by the hands of the traitor Aldebaran." "Ah? 400 years. Do you understand? No. You and Miss Beatrice woke up 400 years after the era you were in. Oh, and I'll tell you this as well." Subaru's understanding completely failed to catch up. He was being swept away and swallowed up, not by the quantity of the information, but by its quality. Before him, the mild-mannered man who had caused this absurd muddy current, Nicola, who possessed the exact same traits as a dear friend he knew well, continued. "That was, no matter how you slice it, you've kept us waiting entirely too long, Mr. Natsuki." It was the exasperated reprimand of a friend, delivered across 400 years and through countless lives. "God, Buddha, Lord Adlagna, I swear that for the rest of my life I will never mourn anyone's death." It truly was a long history of hardships. It was genuinely a grand undertaking passed down through generations of the Suen family. The retrieval of the two of you, sunken at the very bottom of the Grand Mogulade geyser. As he spoke, the mild-mannered man, Nicola, twirled his removed hat in both hands, letting out a deep sigh as if recalling all the struggles up to this point. Seeing him speak of the burdens he shouldered, and the atmosphere of his tone that seemed to say, It can't be helped. Subaru felt the commonalities between Nicola and his friend, Otto Suwon, and his chest tightened. They were similar, so similar that his denial became more and more empty. But if he acknowledged it, he would have to accept it. That this situation Natsuki Subaru was currently placed in was not a dream or an illusion, but reality. Nicola, I understand your excitement, and I can't thank you enough, in fact. But Subaru is far beyond just recovering from an illness, I suppose. In reality, he fainted just from seeing your face and hearing your name, in fact. Pushing him is out of the question, I suppose. No, I get it, all right? I get it. It's just, I've been waiting quite a bit myself too, or rather, I'm entirely out of patience. I was made to step back during the salvage operation, and even for the first meeting. So when exactly am I going to be able to actually feel the fulfillment of the Suwon family's dearest 400-year-old wish? Betty should have given you plenty of fulfillment already, in fact. Or have you not been tossed around here and there enough by door crossing yet? I wonder? Could you please stop saying it like it was something I asked you to do? The sight of Nicola widening his eyes and lamenting was the absolute spitting image of Otto. However, Nicola was slightly younger than Otto and gave off a more slender impression. His hair was longer than Otto's too, tied up around the middle of his back, making him look more like a scholar than a merchant. Despite the differences in details and the commonalities, Nicholas Suwon was unmistakably, just as he had declared himself. He's quick on the uptake, in fact. As expected of Otto's descendant, I suppose. Honestly, it makes me want to sympathize with whatever kind of relationship my ancestor had with the two of you. Well, I suppose it's the casualness that comes from being close, right? Indeed, in fact. He was a good person, and an excellent man, I suppose, to the point where having his descendants dig Subaru and Betty up is almost overkill, in fact. That felt like an episode symbolizing his sheer tenacity rather than his excellence. It was true that Otto had been so active and indispensable to the camp that one wouldn't think he joined on a whim. But what truly made Otto who he was wasn't his administrative skills or the power of his divine protection of soul language, but his innate courage, quick wit, and sheer guts. A persistence that spared no effort to achieve his goal. That was Otto Suwon's greatest weapon, and in the end, he had even utilized his descendants like Nicola to accomplish it. He really was an amazing man. And yet, there would never be another opportunity to praise him directly. Subaru could no longer talk with him, or laugh together with him. Ooh, Subaru. Noticing his breath catch as his vision blurred with tears that relentlessly welled up, Beatrice gently wiped the drops away with a handkerchief. Having his sorrow wiped away by Beatrice's kindness, he sobbed. Subaru acknowledged it. He had no choice but to acknowledge it. The cruel flow of time, and the conclusion that was their defeat. Slowly gathering up his scattered consciousness, his last memory before waking up was a scene in the Pleiades watchtower, surrounded by the bookshelves containing the books of the dead. The exact instant he was betrayed by Al, whose heart he had been concerned for, and was sealed away along with Beatrice by a forbidden art at his hands. And since then, Beatrice and Subaru had spent 400 years sealed away, awakening in this present era. In this era where no one from that time remained, Subaru couldn't hold back the spilling sobs and tears. He just utterly felt so pathetic that he wanted to die. Subaru was pathetic, miserable, unsightly, so lame he wanted to die, and an idiot. With just a single blunder, something irreversible could happen. He should have known that. None other than Priscilla's death should have taught him that. And yet, Natsuki Subaru blundered. He blundered, leaving absolutely everything behind, abandoning all his duties and missions, to end up here. He wanted to die. It wasn't just because of misery or helplessness. It was a death worth challenging for practical benefit. If he used return by death right now, he might be able to go back. 400 years ago. However, his body wouldn't move. He couldn't even kill myself. Even if he could, Beatrice, who was watching over him without leaving his side for a moment, could never allow his decision to seek death. He couldn't die. He simply couldn't die. Even death had now slipped right through Natsuki Subaru's fingers. I understand the feeling of wanting to cry perfectly well, I suppose. Shed lots and lots of tears, Subaru. No matter how many tears you shed, Betty will wipe them all away, in fact. Beatrice's gentle touch wiped away the tears that continued to overflow. Subaru couldn't even harbor the hope of drowning in his tears, yet simultaneously feeling saved by Beatrice's compassion. His heart was torn apart by the contrast between hope and despair. If he had been thrown into this unfathomable future all alone, without a doubt, Natsuki Subaru's heart would have shattered with no choice but to rot away. But if Beatrice hadn't been here, he might have been able to choose suicide. Of course, since his body wouldn't move anyway, that was nothing more than an impossible choice right now. Hope and despair, life and death, past and future violated Natsuki Subaru's soul. It was hopeless. He couldn't do anything. There was absolutely nothing that could be done. However, within that dead-end despair, there was just one thing. Just one thing, a burning doubt within his trampled soul. That was, I know, in fact. Beatrice received the uncertain sound spun by his trembling lips as a certain one. 400 years had passed, the world had changed, and the many people who had lived in our world were no longer anywhere to be found. But there were some exceptions to that. Entities whose lives would not exhaust even after 400 years of time. And the primary example of that was Nicola. Yes, of course. You mean Lady Amelia, right? It felt like clinging to a thin thread, a spider's thread dangling from the heavens. And yet, that name was spoken so casually, making Subaru's heart leap so hard it hurt. It was frustrating that he couldn't use that momentum to sit up, grab Nicola by the collar, and shake him. But his sheer intensity must have gotten across, because Nicola leaned back slightly with a scary and said, "Since I was asked earlier, I've already informed Miss Beatrice, about Lady Amelia. Truthfully, I don't know." Subaru had waited with the feeling of his heart being squeezed tightly in a vise, only to be let down like that. Subaru unintentionally let out a menacing voice from his uncooperative throat, causing a panicked Nicola to wave his hands in front of his face, saying, No. Please don't be mad. I'm not messing around or playing coy. I genuinely have no idea whether Lady Amelia is safe or not. Explain the reason for that as well, I suppose. Otherwise, he'll never accept it, in fact. Couldn't that come from your mouth, Miss Beatrice? Guess that's too cruel. Geez, I can't leave this to Miss Lumella or His Excellency Rosalind. Talk about drawing the short straw. Scratching his head vigorously, Nicola let out a deep sigh of resignation. Then, holding up a single finger, he said, Listen closely. First, just to make sure there are no misunderstandings, Lady Amelia is alive. There is no doubt about that. However, we have no means of making contact, so we don't know if she's safe. That makes no sense, right? Let me break it down a bit. Currently, Lady Amelia has frozen over the Agzad Canyon, a great canyon along the border between the Wallachian Empire and the Holy Kingdom of Gusteco, severing all contact with the outside. And what's more, she trapped the traitor Aldebaran along with herself inside that unyielding ice. Poured with information that made Subaru doubt his ears, his breath caught once again. If his eyelids could move more freely, he would have blinked his rolling eyes 2 or 3 times. The truth Nicola revealed was just that shocking. Amelia is alive. However, she's in the Grand Canyon, frozen in ice alongside Al. Subaru understood the mechanics of it. It was the same as when she put the victims of the authority of lust into a cold sleep in the Watergate city of Pristella. Amelia herself had spoken of a past where she had sealed herself away for over 100 years. She had done the exact same thing to herself and Al, locking them inside the ice. The reason for that was to keep that man from dying, I suppose, and that is, to not lose the method to get Subaru and Betty back, in fact. Beatrice reached the same conclusion as me, and he agreed wholeheartedly with her words. The context behind Amelia freezing herself along with Al. The only conceivable reason was to keep Al from dying, and the reason Amelia did that was because she believed that only Al, who had sealed them away, held the method to undo that seal. At the very least, if Al's life were lost, the option to extract that information from him would be lost forever. Amelia had resorted to extreme measures to prevent that. In truth, considering what the traitor Aldebaran had done, he surely wouldn't have escaped execution even in the political climate of the time. Well, in the end, we used a different method to undo your seal, so we didn't end up relying on Aldebaran's knowledge anyway. Since Subaru was saved, he couldn't complain about Nicola's choice that rendered Amelia's struggle meaningless. But conversely, now that they had been retrieved, there was no longer any reason for Amelia to remain frozen in ice and maintain a situation where no one could interfere. If that was the case, then it should be possible to free the frozen Amelia. Though he had no idea what he was supposed to say to Al, who was frozen right alongside her. But if Al's goal had been to eliminate Subaru forever, then his objective had failed, and a conclusion with no winners would simply be exposed after hundreds of years. Even so, if he could at least just see Amelia. Actually, that's not the only thing. There is another reason we can't meet Lady Amelia. I haven't heard this, in fact. Betty was completely certain that as long as we melted the ice, we could get Amelia out, I suppose. Did you deceive me? Please don't phrase it so poorly. I didn't deceive you, it's just, it makes the situation so complicated that it was hard to explain. Anyway, Lady Amelia froze herself in ice so no one could touch her. But there's another problem besides it being powerful magic. SOEA, a witch. At the unexpected word, Beatrice and Subaru held their breath. For a witch, whether the witch's cult or the witch of envy, to stand in their way here, just how long-lasting of an issue was this? However, the words Nicola continued with betrayed their expectations even further. Because the witch of Tristitia has made the great glacier, where Lady Amelia is into her stronghold, and attacks anyone who tries to approach on sight. That's why no one can do anything about it, because that was the rise of a witch unknown to them who had crossed 400 years. God, Buddha, Lord Adlagna, I swear that for the rest of my life I will never embrace anyone. Lord Natsuki Subaru, I heard you have awakened, I suppose so. Cough, hack, wheeze. Startled by the door being thrown open with a loud bang, the porridge Subaru was eating went down the wrong pipe. As he choked violently, Beatrice, who was feeding him from right in front of Subaru, took the full force of the spat-out porridge to the face and tumbled backward with a ukiya, in fact. In a mere instant, the bedroom had devolved into a catastrophic scene of utter devastation. Wah, wah. Why would you intentionally cough right into Betty's adorable face, I suppose? Every single grain of rice hit Betty's face, in fact. Because I was looking at you. Then I suppose it can't be helped. Here, let me see your face. I'll wipe around your mouth, in fact. At Subaru's excuse, delivered through lingering coughs, Beatrice finished wiping her own face and sighed as she wiped his as well. But contrary to her gentle touch, the voice that followed up with, "and so," was somewhat cold. However, that wasn't directed at Subaru, but at the person who had caused this. At Beatrice's cute yet thorny voice, the person's shoulders gave a massive twitch. You certainly barged in with quite a racket, in fact. If you're visiting someone recovering from an illness, there's a little thing called manners, I suppose. You, Lady Beatrice. I harbored no ill intentions whatsoever, is that so? I merely devoted myself entirely, praying with burning intensity for your safety, I suppose so. In that case, you nearly put an end to those prayers with your own 2 hands. In fact, I don't think you did it on purpose, so stop shrinking away like that, I suppose. My body is much larger than yours, Lady Beatrice, I suppose so. I, Lumella, have grown big and tall like a roaring flame after all. When you get hyped up, the room gets hot, so restrain yourself for Subaru's sake, in fact. Ooh, yes, is that so? The one who dropped her shoulders dejectedly at those words was a tall beauty clad in a dress the same color as her bright, wavy scarlet hair and eyes. She was taller than Subaru, perhaps over 180 centimeters. She possessed striking beauty, a union comprised of a voluptuous figure that matched her height and a flashy, gorgeous outfit. At the appearance of yet another woman he had no recollection of, Subaru, whose upper body had been propped up in bed, while Beatrice's hand fed him, blinked rapidly. My. You look much better than what Lord Nicola told me, and I am so moved, it's spreading like a wildfire, I suppose so. Nevertheless, you truly haven't changed at all, you and Lady Beatrice. I offer you my heartfelt congratulations, I suppose so. Lumella, you're warm. No, at this point you're practically burning up, I suppose. Oh my, to think I let myself get so fired up. Beatrice wedged her small body between Subaru and the beauty, closing in with long, rapid strides, pushing her back. That beauty, the person called Lumella, clasped her hands in front of her chest, blushing as if ashamed of her own momentum and actions, and laughed, oh ho ho, to hide her embarrassment. In her forceful approach, Subaru felt the unmistakable approach of heat. What Beatrice said was true. Lumella was clearly resonating with the surrounding mana and radiating heat. And it was intense and unconscious, reacting to the surge of her emotions. From that fact and her somewhat otherworldly aura, Subaru vaguely guessed her true identity. A spirit? Yes, an affirmative that could burn everything to ashes, I suppose so. Of course I am not merely a spirit, you know. I am a great spirit. A long time has passed since then, I suppose so, and even I, Lumella, have reached the level of a great spirit. Breaking into a broad smile, Lumella placed a hand on her generous chest and puffed it out proudly. In other words, She was a humanoid great spirit, just like Beatrice. Subaru had heard that when spirits grew, they could choose their own forms, but it seemed very few opted for a humanoid shape. Thus, having two humanoid spirits, Beatrice and Lumella, in the same room was an extremely rare sight. However, Subaru felt a strange snag regarding Lumella's words and actions. Your story doesn't make sense. Lumella had a slightly quirky way of speaking, so it could just be an odd choice of words. But in every bit of her demeanor, there wasn't just joy at meeting Subaru, but an underlying nuance of rejoicing in a reunion. But Subaru didn't recognize her. In the first place, he barely knew any spirits anyway, so there wasn't even a need to search his memory. Oh my. What is the matter, Lord Natsuki Subaru? Could it be, in a terrifyingly smoldering turn of events, that you are not pleased to be reunited with me? That is far too much paranoia, in fact. Subaru is just surprised to hear that you became a great spirit, I suppose. He'll get used to it soon enough. Subaru? Seeing Subaru's poor reaction, Lumella sensed my confusion and looked anxious. However, the one who covered for Lumella's anxiety was none other than Beatrice. Beatrice, who was supposed to be my absolute ally, somehow didn't realize that Subaru had no idea who Lumella was, and wore a look that assumed I obviously knew. Wondering why such a disconnect had occurred, he decided to clear up the misunderstanding for now. DNIL. Yes, I suppose so. The moment Subaru tried to insert a brief pause with no, Lumella suddenly replied in a loud voice. Her reaction, her face instantly brightening up, made Subaru's eyes go wide once more. Ignoring his surprise, Lumella patted her chest in relief. Ha, I am so relieved from the bottom of my heart I could burn to ashes, I suppose so. I thought perhaps Lord Natsuki Subaru had forgotten all about me. Even so, it's been a long time since I was called that, and I am so very happy, I suppose so. Nami. Being told Subaru had called her name, he pondered. But soon after, he realized what part of his words had made Lumella think that, and also grasped what it meant, gasping, ah. She had indeed reacted thinking her name had been called, because Lumella was, Aya. Yes, that's right, I suppose so. After all, this is the first time we've met while I'm in this form. I, Lumella Ia Juculius, have been searching for Lord Natsuki Subaru and Lady Beatrice to fulfill a burning special mission from my master. Is that so? At that fierce, practically burning affirmation, Subaru stared intently at her. Lumella Ia Juculius. Having been called Ia and affirming it, she was certainly someone who had the right to rejoice in reuniting with him. One of the 6 quasi-spirits who contracted with the finest of knights, Julius Juculius, supporting his strength and renown as a spirit knight. No, an entity who had ascended to a true spirit, and finally a great spirit. 400 years ago, Subaru too had been saved by her back when she was still a quasi-spirit. And now that Aya had appeared before him as Lumella, no, that wasn't it. She had lent her power to retrieve Beatrice and Subaru as well. Lumella is Nicola's collaborator, I suppose, and so she lent us her strength to pull us out of the Grand Mogulade geyser, in fact. All of this per Julius's instructions, I suppose. Julius did? That's right, I suppose so. Currently, the 6 of us spirit princesses act as minor lords governing the Juculius domain. In truth, Lapicha, Soyona, Dorena, Kiara, and Shinika were all looking forward to reuniting with Lord Natsuki Subaru so much they could burn to a crisp, but it's a terrible shame they couldn't come here, I suppose so. I see. Roaringly eager, Lumella leaned forward like a raging flame. The numerous names she mentioned were probably all the names that the spirits Julius brought with him had taken now that they were great spirits. It seemed they kept their original names as middle names and took the family name Juculius. It took 400 years to keep her promise to Julius, in fact. She's incredibly dutiful, I suppose. All of us are devoted to our master with spreading fiery passion, after all. To fulfill his wishes, 400 years is nothing, I suppose so. That's why we cooperated with Lord Nicola. No, that was a mistake terrible enough to extinguish the flames, I suppose so. Mistake? Properly speaking, it was in cooperation with the successive generations of the Suwon family, I suppose so. Years of accumulated effort bore fruit, and it came true in this generation, I suppose so. The fact that she didn't claim the achievement entirely for themselves was likely not just because of Lumella's dutiful personality, but an acknowledgement born from building a good relationship with Nicola. Subaru sighed, realizing that Otto and Julius's existence lay in the background of it all. You idiots, binding the spirits who had contracted with him and served him for so long with a pact that wouldn't vanish even after his death. Such an act was an uncharacteristically inelegant choice for Julius. What's more, doing it in cooperation with Otto, whom he'd fiercely clashed with in the Wallachian Empire, showed an absolute lack of selecting his methods. No, perhaps that wasn't a story limited to just Julius and Otto. Everyone. Because of their direct connections to Nicola and Lumella, the results of Otto and Julius's actions were easy to understand. But there was no way everyone else was unrelated to this. Subaru knew it. He could be absolutely certain. Everyone had worked desperately for Beatrice and him. Garfield, that person, Frederica, Ryuzu, Meili, Patrash, Rosewall, Clind, Anarose, Ram, Spica, and Rem. Amelia, who had used her power to leave a means of saving them in the future. There was no way everyone else in the camp aside from her hadn't acted for their sake. Chasing after Subaru and Beatrice, who had been suddenly lost, what kind of time had everyone spent leading up to the present? Just how had everyone spent their respective eras? And how had they met their ends? Everything was just about to start. Things getting better, resolving to make things better, all of it was from here on out. The future that was supposed to be there had been lost. The hope that was supposed to arrive had slipped away. And Subaru didn't know anything anymore. Lumella, how much do you know about Betty's companions, I suppose? I apologize, I suppose so. When it comes to the people of your camp, I don't know very much at all. I suppose so. Before and after the two of you disappeared, and the Agzad Canyon became an unparalleled glacier. Far too many things happened, I suppose so. Goodness, what a useless person you are, I suppose. Ooh. Even though I am a great spirit capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with Lady Beatrice now, I still cannot raise my head to one who has lived a lifespan rivaling the Great Four, I suppose so. Seeing Subaru crushed, and realizing that Lumella couldn't return the answer he desired, Beatrice deliberately said so coldly, deflating the large spirit princess. That was Beatrice's consideration, meant to keep things from getting awkward between Subaru and Lumella. Since he understood that, it just made him feel even more pathetic for being entirely reliant on her. At the very least, even one day sooner. Subaru had to become able to move through this world with his own hands and feet, to see things for himself. Because right now, he didn't even have the right to act all high and mighty in his regrets. God Buddha, Lord Odlagna, I swear that for the rest of my life, I will never leave my name behind. The wiring of his mind and body had become a total mess, as Beatrice put it. Reconnecting it properly was going to require a long, grueling period of rehabilitation. It's the after effect of being left as nothing but a soul in that space for so long, stripped of your connection to your flesh, I suppose. The story is a bit different between humans bound to vessels of meat and spirits like Betty, in fact. It's been a while since we had this higher being talk. I was merely putting the difference between you and Betty into words so that Subaru wouldn't blame himself too much, I suppose. To have my intentions doubted hurts Betty immensely, in fact. I say. Beatrice, who adorably turned her face away like that, showed no after effects of being hit by Alzol Shamak, unlike Subaru. The reason for that was exactly as she'd said, and while it was a relief that Beatrice at least was unharmed, it was also true that his feelings of frustration only grew stronger. Unlike spirits whose ode and bodies were directly linked, Subaru had to check the connection between his soul and flesh, one by one, and then force his brain to remember how to operate the newly connected body. If he were to somehow get the wiring wrong, it could easily result in an absurd situation where trying to move his hand would cause his leg to move instead. Rehab? Huh. Subaru muttered in a faltering voice, feeling the extreme stiffness of his own condition. Let alone Subaru himself, there was no one close to him who had ever fallen into such a situation, so it was purely a matter of imagination. But someone who had been bedridden for a long time trying to do rehab might experience struggles similar to Subaru's current ones. If so, the trick to it was probably the same too. Don't rush it too much. Hold on to a firm goal and push forward toward it, step by step. And when it came to pushing toward a goal, one could easily say there were very few people who held a motive as strong as the current Natsuki Subaru. That being said, what is this? I had expected you to have improved at least a little, yet it seems you haven't changed since last month. Wasting my time like this is disrespectful, you know. Disrespectful. Indeed, there was a voice offering a harsh appraisal of the results of Subaru's rehab efforts. It was a severe opinion, but Subaru couldn't utter a word in return. Objectively speaking, his progress-wise was in such a state that you couldn't say his efforts had borne fruit by any stretch of the imagination. As Subaru remained unable to talk back, The person who had handed down the evaluation snorted with a "Hmm." You don't even seem to have the spirit to retort. What a despicable man. If you do not grit your teeth and refuse to yield, at least in your mindset, the ones who spent their time on you will not be able to rest in peace. Your Excellency, you're saying too much. He's starting to look friggin' pitiful even to this dragon. Ha, those around him are far too considerate to speak the truth. Good boy. Good boy for being able to chew your food properly. You're quite the big shot just for being able to swallow it. Why don't you drown yourself in tears of self-directed anger over your own uselessness? That's seriously going too far. Thinking that he didn't deserve to be spoken to that harshly, Subaru got angry just as she wanted. However, even hearing his strained, angry voice, the other party simply brushed it off with a cool face, which left him with no choice but to admit she was utterly detestable. If you only came to be a nuisance, then go home, Rosalind. Subaru is busy with his rehabilitation, I suppose. You should be in quite a busy position yourself, Emperor of Unification. Will you treat me so roughly when I took the time out of my busy schedule to come here? It is the same with Lumella and the others. But just how long do you spirits intend to remain outside the order of the world? The land you live on and the food you obtain, all of it belongs to my domain. Beatrice, if your appearance wasn't of supreme loveliness, I would have had your head lopped off by now. Why don't you just say it, that you're so worried you can't focus on your work? Watch your mouth, Diamond Princess. You and the Cloud Dragon both lack respect for me. Just because I have an artistic soul that cherishes beautiful things, you are getting far too carried away. Placing a hand against her forehead as if to say it was all so deplorable. The individual making statement after statement that was hard to gauge as either strict or not, let out a loud sigh. The two who looked at each other at the sight of this were a silver-haired dog person and a petite girl with black horns, standing on either side of the problem child. Both of them were faces Subaru and Beatrice knew. And they were not acquaintances made in this era. There is no end to your hardships either, in fact. Arakia, Madeline. This dragon don't need friggin' unnecessary consideration. Better than Cecilus. Responding alternately to Beatrice, who had spoken words of concern, were two of the 9 divine generals of the Wallachian Empire, old acquaintances from 400 years ago, Arakia and Madeline. Amazingly, the two they had reunited with in this era had continued to exist as members of the Wallachian Empire even now, 400 years later, without changing their appearances or positions. And the one leading them was, "You lot have some nerve. Who do you think I am? I am the great Emperor of Unification, Rosalind Wallachia. Ignoring me is disrespectful, I say, disrespectful." Saying so, the young girl exploding with age-appropriate dissatisfaction was Rosalind Wallachia, the current Emperor of the Wallachian Empire and a descendant of Abel and Medium. As proof of that, her arrogant speech and haughty attitude were those of Wallachian royalty, but her lovely features, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and round eyes that contrasted with her tone, strongly exhibited the traits of the O'Connell siblings Subaru knew so well. Once, when Subaru had been shrunk by Olbart's hands, Medium had been shrunk at the same time, and she looked very much like that Medium. With this, even if she has a foul mouth like Abel, she's just cute. You speak of the late Emperor Vincent Wallachia, known for his excellent reign, I presume. Well, I care not for an emperor who had less talent than myself anyway. More importantly, no matter how much I pester her, the Diamond Princess won't talk, so you must tell me the story of the Blue Lightning. It's fine. You don't have to. You must. I want to hear the legend of the Blue Lightning. Flailing her short legs, the still young emperor pestered them noisily. In response to her demands, Arakia wore the most extreme scowl imaginable, and Madeline looked exasperated. Having already welcomed Rosalind's visits more times than he could count, on one hand, Subaru had come to understand it as well, but this young emperor apparently admired Cecilus immensely. Yet, because the lips of Arakia and the others who should have known that era were sealed tight, she sought out Subaru as a substitute. Naturally, there were any number of stories about the Blue Lightning that Subaru could tell her. When you come, it throws off his rehabilitation schedule, which isn't good, I suppose. Arakia should just stop being mean and tell her the stories, in fact. Weren't you supposed to have stayed by Cecilus's side until the very end? That's completely wrong. Is it friggin' wrong? If you were with him right up until he died, this dragon doesn't think it's friggin' strange to say you stayed with him till the end. Besides, what? Just like Cecilus asked, You lent a hand in looking for these friggin' guys. Told off by Madeline, who wore a malicious smile, Arakia's grimace reached its absolute limit. Perhaps deciding that no matter what she said it wouldn't matter, Arakia gave up on arguing back and simply pressed her lips together. However, knowing the background of how she had lent her strength for Subaru's sake, gave him an indescribable feeling. To think that Cecilus would entrust the stage to someone else after he stepped down. It seems you left behind quite a lot, surprisingly. The fact that I lent you the flames of the Yang sword was also due to the story passed down through the Wallachian royal family, an appeal from the Oni girl. Without my Yang sword, you would never have seen the light of day again. See to it that you never forget that. As she spoke, Rosalind held the Yang sword she had drawn from an empty scabbard in her raised hand. With a wry smile at the young emperor's attitude of showing off the crimson blade, Subaru was deeply moved by the story, which he was hearing for not the first time today. The Yang sword Wallachia, passed down through the Wallachian emperors. The mighty power it possessed had destroyed the black sphere of Ol Shamak that had sealed Subaru and Beatrice. That was the result of Nicola and Lumella seeking cooperation, and the reason Rosalind answered their call was precisely what she had just said. The existence of the Oni girl, who had pleaded for help to rescue Subaru and the others from the Wallachian royal family, and secured their promise. Rem. In the slowly revealing footprints of the past, Subaru was made to taste an itch he could never get used to, no matter how many times he felt it, and the heat of the tears it brought with it. Following the tragedy that had struck Subaru and the others, Rem had also crossed over to the Wallachian Empire to do what she could, making arrangements with Abel and the others there. Or perhaps Cecilus's idea to entrust the future to Arakia had also been influenced by Rem's existence. Far too many people had tried to save Subaru and Beatrice, and they had ultimately reached a future where they actually managed to pull it off. That was why, come to think of it, I heard a rumor that once you are eventually able to move, you intend to challenge that unparalleled ice glacier, that you plan to cross swords with the witch. Yeah. Nodding with few words, Subaru affirmed Rosalind's inquiry. Right now, Subaru's purpose for regaining the freedom of his body through rehab was to reunite with Amelia, who was said to be in the permafrost zone. Nicola and Lumella had deemed it extremely dangerous and wanted to discuss it again once his body could move, but he had no intention of bending on this. It was true that with things having turned out this way, Subaru and Beatrice had been forced to give up on many things. But unlike things that had to be given up on because they would never reach them, Amelia was absolutely out there. That could never, ever be a reason to give up. It is a thorny path, but the stance of daring to tread it is not bad. In a world where the so-called witch's cult perished in exchange for the kingdom's downfall, and the fear of the Witch of Envy has become almost entirely a dead letter, the reason the title of witch still wears a shroud of awe is due to the existence of the Witch of Tristitia. If she were to be gone, it would be meaningful for me as well. Why have you fallen silent? It is disrespectful. It makes one want to fall silent, in fact. You need to learn to be a little more considerate of Betty and the others, I suppose. To us, events that are recorded in history books happened only very recently, you know. Let alone the fact that that Lugunica is gone, it's just too much to accept. If you cannot overcome the surging hardships, you perish. It is simply a matter that remains unchanged whether it be a person, a land, or a nation. Both Lugunica and Kararagi are now merely names quietly faded into the pages of history, as if to say that was the way of the world, Rosalind. The Emperor of Unification, the ruler of the Wallachian Empire that had swallowed up the kingdom of Lugunica and the city-states of Kararagi, shrugged her shoulders. Honestly, because there were far too many unbelievable events crashing over them, he didn't know if he was fully able to be surprised by that fact either. To be perfectly clear, nothing shook Subaru and Beatrice more than the fact that 400 years had passed, leaving everything behind. Still, as someone who had thrown his all into the royal selection to vie for the throne of that very kingdom, until just recently, the news that the kingdom had perished was not something he could easily swallow. In the flow of time, some things change. Some things don't friggin' change. Whichever you find value in, merely letting yourself be swept away and regretting it is a friggin' foolish thing. That might have been advice or a warning from the ancient dragonkin, who, despite her young appearance, had lived alongside humans for over 400 years, continuing to watch over their deeds. Even Madeline and Arakia, or Rosalind, the Emperor of Wallachia, which had swallowed 3 nations to become an even more massive state, could not stop the flow of time. That was exactly why, he felt, she was advising him not to just compliantly surrender himself to the current. At any rate, I'll do it. That's the spirit, in fact. Betty will support Subaru with all her might, I suppose. Time was precious. No matter how much time he had, it was never enough. Even if he grudged it deeply, he could never return what slipped through his fingers, like grains of sand, back into his hands. That was why he had to act while it was still in his grasp, so that he would never again realize how blessed he was only after he had lost it. God, Buddha, Ode Lagna, I swear I will never seek peace for the rest of my life. Contrary to his eager feelings and his impatience with his sluggishly progressing rehab, Subaru and Beatrice's days flowed by slowly, dispassionately, and ironically, without any major incident. It is Miss Beatrice's request, so we will basically leave the care of Mr. Natsuki's personal needs to her. If you need anything, please tell us at any time. A house too large would be too much to manage, so for now, please use as much of this house as you need. Subaru was surprised when Nicola casually handed over an entire house with those words, but given Subaru and Beatrice's current situation, they had no choice but to rely on his goodwill. Even so, when Subaru told him he would definitely repay the debt, settling debts strictly, as a humble merchant, I also find that to be a preferable way of thinking. However, I don't really consider this to be a loan to you two, Mr. Natsuki. Why is that? Let me see. It might be because I believe that the years of hardship bearing fruit was all because you were saved. Within the Suin family, I'm quite the eccentric, you see. My siblings and relatives are a bit more composed, or rather, their way of thinking is more mature, but that just doesn't suit me. I've always been told that I'll either achieve greatness or die like a dog on the roadside, and so here we are. Here we are. I fulfilled the Suin family's earnest wish of 400 years. With this, even if I were to die at any moment, I could proudly say I achieved something before dying in the streets. So, keep your money. Just please spend your tomorrows in a way that makes me think I was glad to be able to help. For Nicola to declare that so cheerfully, it was fundamentally impossible for Subaru not to feel like he owed him a massive debt. Besides, he felt it strongly anew. The unmistakable oddness that Nicola couldn't hide. The man treated as an oddball even within the Suin family. Pardon the intrusion, I suppose so, Lord Natsuki Subaru. How have you been feeling since then? I, Lumela, have been burning with worry over you, I suppose so. Lumela, who showed her face quite frequently, leaving one to wonder what was happening with the governance of the Jukulius domain, treated them very well, perhaps partly because she was building a friendship with Beatrice. Subaru had been indebted to her constantly since her time as Aya as well. While her other sisters naturally didn't come to visit Subaru, she said they came up in their daily conversations. It naturally leads to opportunities to remember our master, so we too are accumulating burning, precious moments. Of course, there is not a single day that we don't think of our master, but we are fully enjoying memories rich in color and flavor, I suppose so. That gives me Come to think of it, when you found us, oh my, oh my, oh my, would you like to hear about it? Is that so? My, it was a blazing incident of epic proportions, you know. After all, the massive hole of the Grand Mogolade Geyser connects to the underside of this world, so finding what flowed into it was a tremendous struggle. It's a miracle you found us. Of course, it didn't go perfectly on the first try, I suppose so. Taking 400 years, we gathered the lacking technology and power, and accomplished it all together as a group, indeed. Therefore, Lord Natsuki Subaru, please do not lament and grieve, I suppose so. We too were bitterly regretful that we could not bring you back to the era in which our master lived, I suppose so. But, yeah, I know, Lumela. Thank you, 400 years, though it could be summarized in just a few words. To those who had actually lived through that time, it held an unfathomably immense meaning. The days Beatrice had spent in the Forbidden Library had ironically been the exact same 400 years. Needless to say, Beatrice knew the weight of that time. A span of 400 years was long enough to end the lives of the people Subaru knew so well, end the lives of the ones who came after them, and still not be enough to reach them. It made Subaru painfully aware that his and Beatrice's current existence was built upon the struggles of countless people, some of whom they didn't even know, all striving to save them. What trivial sentimentality! For those in our position to have the hopes of mixed refuse like yourselves entrusted to us is neither something that started just now, nor will it ever end, even without consulting her about anything. Rosalind saw through the worries and anguish they harbored with her innate insight, laughing mockingly as if making fun of them. It was undoubtedly a terrible attitude toward their earnest worries. Yet, the reason he didn't feel like getting angry was because he was won over by her appearance, and because her actions and the way she interacted with them clearly conveyed that her true feelings weren't as sharp as her words. Still, you really show no signs of real progress. When will you recreate the legendary Sparka that I hear became a talking point on the Gladiator Island? Like hell I could ever do that. Rest easy. You needn't worry. Even I have no intention of throwing you against a beast with no sense of humor like Giltala. I'll have the Diamond Princess or the Cloud Dragon do it. How about it? How about it, my ass? Are you an idiot? You call me a fool. Disrespectful. That is disrespectful. Chuckling and revealing her unguarded side, Rosalind seemed to be using the excuse of coming to hear stories of past legends to let her wings out and relax around Subaru and Beatrice. He could guess that Rosalind's competence, if you subtracted her age, was likely on par with Abel's, but managing a unified empire nearly 3 times the size of what it was during Abel's reign must have entailed extraordinary hardship. He had no intention of relying on her, but since Nicola and Lumella wouldn't rush Subaru, Rosalind's harsh words had the effect of kicking his rear into gear, straightening his posture. However, a miscalculation. I thought if you talked, Her Excellency wouldn't ask me anymore. Yet it seems the more she friggin' learns, the more her interest grows. Seeing Arakia's friggin' disgusted face is also one of Her Excellency's hobbies, so it looks like you're being led around by the friggin' nose. Madeline won't help me, either. Don't get friggin' cocky thinking you can bend this dragon to your will, human. For Arakia, who was thoroughly taking the brunt of Rosalind's attitude, the stance of Subaru and Madeline, who encouraged it, was apparently entirely unwelcome. Honestly, Subaru thought it was Arakia's problem for not having fully digested Cecilis's death even after 400 years, but alongside Madeline, he simply kept her around as material for teasing. Be that as it may, Subaru, good work again today, I suppose. Whether they had visitors that day or not, he always welcomed the end of the day with his beloved Beatrice. Even while facing Subaru, who harbored such strong feelings of impatience, Beatrice never showed a hint of it, despite being in a position where she might have felt even more frustration than him. He believed that was because of Beatrice's kindness, but you're overthinking it, in fact. Betty simply knows very well that rushing won't yield good results, I suppose. Even looking like this, I'm an 800-year-old adult, you know. Super elderly. Oh, of all the things to say, I suppose. I won't rush you, but I will get angry at your rudeness, in fact. Besides, if Subaru ever loses heart, I'll properly scold you. I suppose. Loses heart, indeed. Other than that, there's no reason Betty would ever slap Subaru, I suppose. I told you when you first woke up, you know. Do you remember, I suppose? No matter what has happened, we can overcome it, Subaru. Right, that was it. That was what she had told him. And knowing he had to make that a reality became Subaru's driving force. The days passed by without major incident, but he couldn't just accept that aimlessly. Time was so precious he begrudged every moment. Not a single day, not a single hour, not a single second could be wasted. That was, God Buddha, Lord Adlagna. I swear I will never lament failure for the rest of my life. The moment that stood in the way of Natsuki Subaru's progress came during a slice of an ordinary, unchanging day. In other words, it was a sudden, unheralded disaster. I think, I constantly think. That large man abruptly intruded upon Subaru and Beatrice's daily life. He wore a magnificent black outfit with a white coat draped over his shoulders. His bright yellow-green hair was neatly slicked back, and the contrast with his dark skin vividly highlighted his presence. His rugged yet handsome features harbored the contradictory trait of a wild elegance. He had a rich color to his soul that seared an unforgettable presence directly into the brain of anyone who laid eyes on him just once. Therefore, it was undeniably his first time seeing this opponent. Unlike with Lumella, this was not a case where an acquaintance had changed in appearance over time. This uninvited man had suddenly appeared at their dinner table. As it happened, Nicola, Lumella, and Arakia were all gathered at the dining table that day. It wasn't planned, But just as Subaru was enthusiastically preparing to show off the results of his rehab at the more bustling than usual dinner table, it happened. From experience, anger only lasts for about 6 seconds. A mere 6 seconds. If one can ride out those 6 seconds, they can avoid the maximization of that primitive emotional explosion known as the expression of anger. Subaru was taken aback by the presence of the man stepping into the house. But leaving Subaru aside, the rest of the group instantly changed their complexions, kicking back their chairs and standing up on guard. The one who moved the fastest was the greatest in this room. No, even looking across the entire world, the one who possessed top-class suppressing power, Arakia. During the great disaster in Wallachia, by absorbing a part of the stone lump muspel, one of the four great spirits, the spirit eater Arakia, had obtained an abnormal level of power. Over time, having made that power even more her own, she was called the Diamond Princess and fully exhibited her might as the right-hand woman of the current emperor, Rosalind Wallachia. In other words, from all over Arakia's body, several glittering bands of light extended, becoming blades of supreme hardness that mercilessly cleaved whatever they touched, surging violently across the dining table. 12 bands of light. Their target was the dark-skinned giant standing boldly before them. The Sanskrit-style tattoo on the left side of that man's face glowed faintly. To make my opponent taste my anger to the absolute maximum, it means I need to finish things within 6 seconds. In an instant, a raging explosion of light centered on the man swept away the bands of light that were supposed to slice him to ribbons head-on, bisecting their wielder Arakia into 28 chunks. The aftermath of that slashing light spreading explosively, obliterating Nicola and Lumela on his left and right. And, exactly 6 seconds, the man declared without changing his expression. In his hands were suddenly twin swords, two bizarre blades whose ends beyond the hilts had become blades of light. That was the true nature of the sword dance that had instantly killed Arakia, and by its aftermath Nicola and Lumela, and had driven Subaru to the brink of death caught in the swirling gale of its blades. Ah! Lying flat on his back on the ground, bathed in the ruins of the prepared dinner, Subaru groaned. There was no pain. Ironically, Subaru's incompletely rehabilitated body was not merely hard to move, but the wiring of his 5 senses, including his sense of pain, was completely messed up, making it so he couldn't grasp any real sense of the sudden tragedy that had assaulted his flesh, as if it were happening on the other side of a screen. However, who the hell are you, I suppose? I'm surprised. Surprised, very surprised. You survived? Even if the pain attacking his own body felt like someone else's problem, he couldn't remain indifferent to the bravery of Beatrice, who stood with her arms spread wide to protect Subaru. Just before the shockwave surged forward, Beatrice had instinctively protected herself and Subaru. She, regretting that her hands couldn't reach Nicola and the others, instantly bit back that regret and glared sharply at the perpetrator, the man. In her eyes there was certain anger and a slight hint of confusion. The reason for that confusion was, a human or a spirit, I wonder? Both and neither. I am myself. And Trice. His resolved scream, like coughing up blood, was hoarse and served as little deterrence. It merely made Beatrice's small body harden with a disproportionate resolve, driving her to a reckless challenge. The result of that, needless to say, was too miserable to look at. I shall erase the filth known as spirits, 6 seconds. With that cruel sentence as his last words, it took less than 6 seconds for Beatrice and Natsuki Subaru to be wiped from this world together. Separated by 400 years of time, the spirit and contractor salvaged far into the future as a result of many people holding out hope. It was an agonizingly tragic conclusion for their final moments, and that meant, times I think, and I think, I constantly think. The moment his consciousness cleared, Natsuki Subaru returned to that spot where an intruder had crashed their dinner, signifying the beginning of his battle 400 years in the future, a hopeless, unwinnable, muddy war of attrition against the mad Prince Vague Adgard. God Buddha, Ad Lagna. I swear I will never seek understanding from anyone for the rest of my life. The mad Prince Vague Adgard. He was one of the strongest existences of the 4 great nations, standing shoulder to shoulder with the sword Saint Reinhard van Astria, the blue lightning Cecilus Segmund, and the Admiral Hannibal, though that came with the caveat that it was strictly a story from the 400 years ago that Subaru and the others had lived in. If it was the sword saint of the kingdom of Lugunica, the blue lightning of the Wallachian Empire, and the admirer of the Kararagi city-states. Then it was a given that the mad prince of the Holy Kingdom of Gusteko would follow. However, in contrast to his overwhelming name value, information about the man himself was surprisingly scarce. The story that, despite being a member of the Holy Kingdom's royal family, he murdered over a dozen of his own blood relatives in the same position, and that it took an army of thousands 7 days and 7 nights to finally subdue and imprison him, was famous. Or rather, it was said that there were no other rumors circulating about him besides that. Because of how utterly absurd that rumor was, some had even suspected that the existence of the Mad Prince itself was merely a performance by the Holy Kingdom to keep the strongest of other nations in check. However, that suspicion was nothing more than a suspicion. The Mad Prince existed. His abilities were exactly as overwhelmingly powerful as the rumors suggested, and even from the perspective of someone who knew all three of the other strongest he allegedly stood alongside, one could definitively say he rivaled them. And unlike them, only the Mad Prince had survived into the present day, 400 years later. The trick behind that was a half-breed of human and spirit. It's what you call an open secret. The story is that he is the only spirit human in the world. At Nicola's words, spoken as if he were biting down on something bitter, Subaru couldn't help but gasp. A half-human, half-spirit. He was surprised that the birth of such an entity was even possible, and further shocked by the incomprehensible fact that this very spirit human was relentlessly targeting spirits. It was true that there were spirits in the world who possessed appearances indistinguishable from humans, such as Beatrice and Lumella, but their mana bodies, made entirely of mana, were fundamentally different from humans in their mechanics, making it seem impossible for them to bear children. However, as a matter of fact, he does exist. As the world's greatest disaster, one who constantly and publicly vows to eradicate all spirits which form a part of his own roots. That confirmed information from Nicola drove the point home to Natsuki Subaru. Up until now, Subaru had clashed with all sorts of formidable foes and had been forced into agonizing struggles each time. Even so, excluding the screw-loose individuals of the witch's cult, the only existences he truly had no choice but to fight to the death were exceptions like Todd Fang and Elsa Granhirt. Sometimes Subaru thought that, depending on the method and their goals, it might have even been possible to fight alongside the likes of Todd or Elsa. That possibility did not exist with this opponent. Many of the things Subaru loved were inextricably linked to spirits. In other words, the Mad Prince Vague Adgard was utterly incompatible with Natsuki Subaru, because there was absolutely no way Subaru could ever walk side by side with an existence that killed spirits. 6 seconds. Above all else, the blade wielded by the Mad Prince cared nothing for collateral damage if it meant killing a spirit. Therefore, Subaru was killed once again. Once, twice, 10 times, 20 times. The count mercilessly piled up. It was a stroke of luck that return by death, which he hadn't yet been able to test once in this era 400 years later, had activated. Setting aside his despair and disappointment that his restart point wasn't set to 400 years ago, it was still a stroke of luck. However, it left him with a massive problem, that being, times, I think, and I think. I constantly think. Returning to that moment right before the Mad Prince's atrocity began. Once again, Natsuki Subaru was still in a situation where his rehab was incomplete, unable to even stand without someone's help. 6 seconds. And so, without being able to do a single thing, powerless Subaru's world was slashed apart by the cutting light once more. Even among the spirals of return by death that Natsuki Subaru had tasted, this assault by the Mad Prince was a hardship that ought to be classified as just about the absolute worst. If one had to compare it, the game of tag with Olbart Dunkelken in the demon city of Chaos Flame, or perhaps the series of events including the Sparka on the gladiator island of Jinunhive, might rival it. But even though his body had shrunk then, his limbs had still moved freely, and the fact that he was able to proactively test out various things to break the situation made those obstacles seem like heaven compared to now. After all, even now, after months of living in rehab, there was almost no improvement seen in Natsuki Subaru's physical disability. He was in a state where he couldn't even walk properly on his own. Throw in an opponent with an absurd level of power on par with the first sword Saint Reed Astria, the strongest enemy Subaru had ever encountered, and his chances of survival were narrower than the eye of a needle. Therefore, Subaru continued to die. Unable to save Arakia, or Nicola, or Lumella, unable to even let Beatrice escape, but rather blocking their escape route with his crippled body. He continued to let them die and continued to die. You truly are an annoyingly irritating person enough to scorch one, I suppose so. To treat us with such hostility. Thanks to you, the Juculius domain is in utter ruin, you know. Naturally, the Juculius domain governed by the 6 great spirits was, from the perspective of the mad prince who sought the extermination of spirits, the foremost vanguard of lands that should not exist. Perhaps they had clashed many times before. Lumella's feelings toward the appearing mad prince were a mixture of fear and anger in equal parts. That's the sword Cecilus wanted. I'll take it and break it in front of his gravestone. Arakia's observation revealed that the twin swords the mad prince held in his hands, harboring blades of light, were among the world's most prominent magic swords, standing alongside the dragon sword and the yang sword, the cursed sword Aeon. The sword gale of the cursed sword, which was said to suck up its owner's mana and unleash sharpness corresponding to it, was something that easily pierced even the defenses of Arakia, the Diamond Princess. In their current state, Subaru and the others did not have many means of protecting themselves from that raging storm. Bad, bad, bad. Saying we let our guard down makes it sound like we're at fault. But isn't this way too unpredictable of a disaster? If we end up bumping into the scariest guy in the world with no warning like this, there's no way our preparations can make it in time, right? In this place, Nicola, who alongside the immobilized Subaru lacked combat prowess, screamed desperately with a pale face at the sudden encounter. Unlike Otto, it seemed Nicola was truly a merchant through and through, lacking the guts to stand firm in a bloodbath. However, expecting that of him when he was younger than Otto was cruel, and he was already doing quite well just by not getting in the way of his allies. And above all else, Betty will protect Subaru, in fact. I'm the only one left, I suppose. No matter how many times their lives were cut short by the blade wielded by the Mad Prince, Beatrice was always there, stepping in right before Subaru's luck ran out, shielding him with her small body. Because her unwavering devotion spurred Subaru's heart on, time and time again, 6 seconds, even amidst the repeated spiral of death, Subaru's heart would not snap. Once it broke, he would never be able to stand again. That was why breaking was the scariest thing of all. To prevent that, Subaru EMT. Responding to Subaru's desperate expression, Beatrice reacted and activated EMT. The field of absolute nullification magic expanded, completely enveloping Subaru and the others around the dinner table. Within this field, any effect related to mana was nullified. That applied to Arakia, the Spirit Eater, and Lumella, the Great Spirit, as well. So, if it just ended there, it would merely be aiding the enemy, but it's a magic sword, right? The blades of the cursed sword Aeon frayed, and their light dispersed within the field of EMT spot on. It severed the effects of the magic sword possessed by the Mad Prince, successfully keeping the cause of death that had sliced Subaru and the others to ribbons over dozens of loops at bay for the first time. A bizarre magic with a bizarre effect. This is outside my expectations. His opening strike hindered by EMT, the Mad Prince uttered his first remark devoid of hostility. Right into the side of the Mad Prince's face, Arakia unleashed a fierce driving kick. Die. As the Spirit Eater, Arakia's power from the spirits she had absorbed within her was sealed by EMT. But even setting that aside, her physical capabilities were among the greatest in the world. The power of her full-force kick was like an artillery shell. In fact, the sound of the impact and the shockwave it spread concealed enough firepower to snap the neck of a trained warrior in a single blow. Except, unfortunately, I have no reason to comply with your request, and thus I will not comply. The Mad Prince facing her was also a monster equal to or greater than Arakia. The Mad Prince easily caught Arakia's kick with a hand holding the hilt of his magic sword. Man and woman, hand and foot, defense and offense. He shoved all the conditions of their contrast aside by sheer brute force. However, Arakia was not the only one taking on the Mad Prince. I am right here as well, I suppose so. Shouting loudly. Lumella smashed a chair over the Mad Prince's back from behind. Having promptly abandoned the use of magic, the Great Spirit slipped around to his back while Arakia drew his attention and delivered a merciless downward swing from her tall height. The wooden chair shattered with a cracking sound, and the posture of the Mad Prince, struck defenselessly in the back of the head, swayed forward. It worked. A faint glimmer of hope reared its head. You interfered with the composition of mana. Quite impressive. Quite impressive. However, in an instant, light blades erupting one after another from the body of the mad prince, who had stood his ground, swept across Arakia's arms and left leg, and Lumella's torso, slicing them entirely off. Wah! Divine protection of adaptation. Witnessing Arakia and the others get blown away as they leaked the mana composing their existences, Subaru gasped, and the mad prince's eyes turned toward him. Deeming Subaru and his party a threat immediately, the mad prince activated his cursed sword from within the field, where everything was supposedly nullified, unleashing its blade of light in a diagonal slash. EM. A split second later, Beatrice switching her magic kept Subaru's life away from death just in the nick of time. In exchange for becoming unable to move, attacks could no longer reach Subaru, and Beatrice in their reality shifted half a step out of phase. But that didn't mean they had no means of attacking. Improve! Invisible black hands of darkness emerged from Subaru's chest and closed in on the mad prince's face. Punching right through his face, catching him off guard, Beatrice would smash him with her yin magic. At worst, Subaru didn't mind if he fainted from mana depletion, as long as it sent the mad prince to another dimension with Ol Shamak. A blatant misdirection of your gaze. A trap? If it is not a trap, you are inexperienced. The mad prince easily dodged that invisible punch by merely tilting his head. He adapted to EMT, and EMM's defense wouldn't hold out much longer. Above all, EMM could only protect Subaru and Beatrice, leaving their surrounding allies defenseless. Arakia and Lumella both needed treatment immediately, and naturally Nicola too. There was no response from Nicola. Not being a combatant, he should have stepped back so as not to get in the way of Subaru and Arakia. Honestly, it was so sudden that I wasn't entirely confident I'd be able to use this contingency. But, right after Subaru had that thought, Nicola, who had backed away to the wall, raised his right hand. Then, he snapped his fingers powerfully, playing a high-pitched sound. It was a gesture his ancestor with the same traits favored as a trigger whenever he had shrewdly set something up, and it seemed that quirk and shrewdness had been thoroughly passed down to his descendants. Wait, nothing's happening, in fact. Beatrice, who must have harbored the same expectations as Subaru, widened her eyes at the utter lack of change. Was it a misfire? Impatience raced up Subaru's back, but Nicola's expression as he snapped his fingers held no tragic desperation. What he had was the glint of a gambler taking an all-or-nothing bet. Facing that head-on, the mad prince with his cursed sword in hand narrowed his eyes. That's strange. I'm pretty sure I told you to keep your hands off the glacier, didn't I? A voice echoed. In a flash, countless white lights surging from all directions pierced through the safe house. Nicola had prepared from the outside, and a vicious dance of light trampled the interior. Unable to comprehend what had just happened, Subaru stared frozen at the sight before his eyes. In an instant, the temporary shelter Nicola had given Subaru and Beatrice collapsed, and the site where it was blown away by the light was reduced to a disastrous scene, choked with thick white dust. The figure of the mad prince who had been closing in on them was gone, and the corner of his mind assumed he was blown away by the explosion of light. Beatrice, who had leapt at Subaru's chest in the spur of the moment, looked up at him with her large eyes round, a face surprised by the sudden situation, and gasped, "Ah, Subaru, your leg, my leg." At Beatrice's trembling voice, Subaru struggled to look down at his own body. From the bad feeling of her words, he had a chill that a leg or something had been blown clean off. But as long as the effect of EMM was active, no calamity could harm them. Instead, the light had pierced right through the physical image of Subaru and Beatrice, whose existences were shifted out of phase. Is this? Right before blinking Subaru's eyes, the light stabbing through like it was piercing an afterimage, its fraying sparkles peeling away as if unraveling, was a single long needle. A needle made of mana, about the length of Subaru's elbow to his fingertips, unraveled and scattered the moment its purpose was served, disappearing completely. He recognized it. He was pretty sure he had had his life snatched away by this exact same light multiple times before. But that was something that shouldn't happen again even if he wished for it. So it's you. A low, emotionless voice shook the eardrums of a dumbfounded Subaru. Subaru and Beatrice snapped their eyes over. Beyond the billowing dust, what slowly seeped into their vision was the faintly glowing tattoo on the terrifying man's face. Despite being at the epicenter of that light explosion, there wasn't a single scratch on the mad prince. However, for the first time in the nearly 100 times Subaru had repeated return by death without the mad prince ever breaking his composure, Subaru saw a look of wariness dwell on his profile, and the target of the Mad Prince's wariness was, "Bullying the weak again? You never get tired of it, do you, Mr. Mad Prince?" Dressed in a gown woven with myriad colors, a beautiful witch stood there. A witch. Yes, a witch. At a single glance, Natsuki Subaru, no, every living thing, was made to understand through the alarm bells of their instincts that she was nothing else. If one sees a monster as massive as a mountain, if one smells the bloody breath of a ravenous beast, if one hears the roar of a dragon locking onto its prey, anyone instinctively realizes it is a life-threatening danger. That very same function was screaming it. That she was a witch. Regrettable, quite regrettable. To have my actions trivialized so much is regrettable. The Mad Prince at 12 o'clock, the witch at 3 o'clock, keeping both of them at the edges of his vision respectively, Subaru couldn't suppress the trembling welling up within him. This was perhaps a fateful encounter between the most terrifying beings of the current age. But, however, to Subaru, it had an even greater meaning. Subaru, no. To Beatrice, who just called out to Subaru as well. It meant something to Subaru and her, because the beautiful witch that appeared there was it 6 seconds? Mr. Mad Prince's little obsession. Well then, tilting her head slightly, the witch with her dark, damp gaze spun a beautiful tone from her lips. Before she could even finish, the Mad Prince moved. The distance between him and the witch vanished, and just as the Mad Prince's blades sought to cleave her slender neck from both sides. In an instant, the Mad Prince and his twin swords were halted by a pouring rain of light. The shockwaves and explosions birthed by the rain of light mercilessly engulfed the Mad Prince, who was in full combat mode. The Mad Prince swatted them away with his twin swords, defending himself. However, the time generated there was a fatal split second against the witch. "I'll multiply it by 1,000,000. Compress agony, saying that the witch snapped her fingers with a click. The next moment, the movements of the Mad Prince, wielding his twin swords, lost their brilliance. A disruption emerged in his flawlessly precise sword dance, and weaving through that opening, the torrential storm of light slipped past his defenses, piercing into the man's body one after another. Moreover, it didn't end there. The light dug deeply into the Mad Prince, and detonated at the deepest part of his wounds, blowing one of the world's strongest existences to pieces from the inside out. The overwhelming clash of power and its instantaneous conclusion left them dumbfounded. When the oppressive pressure on their vision from the light explosion cleared, there wasn't even a fragment of the Mad Prince left. The witch had butchered that terrifyingly powerful man all by herself in the blink of an eye. No, not by herself. Good work, little Crimson Scorpion. Spilling an ennui-filled sigh, a gigantic scorpion, a witch beast, clad in a bright red carapace, as large as an earth dragon or even bigger, slowly stepped out beside the witch. The witch beast the witch had brought along was the true identity of the overwhelming suppressive firepower of the light. And the backdrop behind that combination was, "Hey, are we still doing this?" No. Frustrating. It is frustrating, but I will admit it. As frustrating as it is my loss. A shuddering chill ran up his spine, and Subaru directed his attention toward the voice. At the epicenter where the rain of light had fallen, about 10 meters away, mist wavered. No, it wasn't mist that was wavering, but a human figure, thin as haze. With his presence thinned out to the absolute limit, the Mad Prince stood there, looking like mist. Switching between a physical body and a mana body. Something like that is impossible, I suppose. If you wish to argue whether it is possible or impossible, this form of mine is proof over argument. Irritating, truly irritating, but what you ought to say is not impossible, but incomprehensible, as irritating as it is. To Beatrice, who had muttered that involuntarily, the Mad Prince replied with a detachment, as if it were someone else's problem, despite it being his own body, or perhaps even mixed with a sense of emptiness. When Beatrice fell completely silent at that, the faintly present Mad Prince looked at the witch. "If you are here, does that mean the unparalleled ice glacier is left unguarded? Maybe. But it's impossible. Did you really think I'd leave without setting up any countermeasures? After all, everyone else is stupider than me. Plotting won't work. The amount of time I have to agonize over things is different from yours. Or, shall we make it 60 million seconds next time? What do you intend to pay for that little game? Who knows? Does that have anything to do with you?" Inch by inch, the quiet, volatile tension between the Mad Prince and the witch escalated. Both appeared to be suppressing their emotions, but it was clear they found each other a hindrance. Sensing the swelling of their fighting spirit, the witch beast called the Crimson Scorpion rubbed its claws together. For a few moments their glaring contest continued, but I shall erase all unnatural filth by my own hands. Remember it, and do not forget. Then why don't you start by erasing yourself? It is still far too early for that. Not yet. Whether that declaration was aimed at the witch, or at Subaru who nestled close to the filth he spoke of, the existence of the mad prince faded, wiping completely away from the spot. Not pretending to vanish, but truly vanished. The threat was gone. However, it left another threat behind. With only people like him left, I'm just so sick of it. Letting out a small sigh at the vanished presence of the mad prince, the witch shrugged her exposed, slender white shoulders. Then, petting the carapace of the witch beast beside her, she spun around. Along with her movement, her long, light reddish-brown hair and the large ribbon tying it back swayed in the wind. Just like that, the witch briskly started walking, approached Subaru and Beatrice, passed right by them, and headed to the back. Frantically following her back with his eyes, he noticed it. Behind Subaru and Beatrice lay the battered Arakia and Lumela, and Nicola, who was being shielded by the two of them. Amidst that explosion of light that blew the house away, all three of them were alive. Because EMT had cut out right beforehand, Arakia and the others who were able to use magic again had managed somehow. However, they were not unharmed. The one with the most severe injuries in particular was, "Are you the one who did something to me?" Well now, whatever could you be talking about? Sigh, meaningless bargaining is just so tiring. Listen here, mana signatures are unique to each person. So if you investigate carefully, you can clearly tell who set up what. I have all the time in the world to investigate. So you're the one who did it, and that is your retribution. The witch's white finger, as she said that, pointed at Nicola, whose legs were splayed on the ground. At his left leg, which was missing from the knee down. Does it hurt? Then don't do it again. Being used conveniently is unpleasant to me. Stating that to Nicola, who was profusely bleeding and covered in a greasy sweat, the witch smoothed her hair and turned her back on Arakia and the others who were glaring at her. Without saying a word to Nicola and the others, or even to Subaru and Beatrice, the witch was about to walk away, when instinctively Subaru stopped her. To do so, the word he called out was, yet the name he was sure he called out somehow failed to form into words. Huh? Unable to vocalize the voice he was sure he had uttered, Subaru doubted his own throat, but he couldn't sense any abnormality there. If he had to say, it remained the same frustrating throat plagued by its persistent disability. He tried to pronounce it. He tried to call the witch. The name of the witch he was supposed to know. Why? You. Turning around, the witch looked Subaru straight on for the first time. Her pale blue-green eyes vaguely reflected Subaru, forming his image. Hoping that some positive emotion would bud there, Subaru waited for her next words. Frustratingly unable to properly form the shape in the back of his throat, rolling it around. Why such a desperate face? You're weird. However, the witch did not show the expected reaction. With her eyes gazing at the world in boredom completely unchanged, she merely left those words and tried to resume walking. He didn't want to let her walking away back leave just like that. Wub you wait. Kk. Subaru. The hand he tried to extend wouldn't extend. The leg he tried to move wouldn't move. And Subaru's body, insufficient in both, collapsed onto the spot in a disgraceful, unsightly manner. At the pitiful sight of Subaru, Beatrice let out a scream-like cry and crouched down right beside him. Right now, he couldn't spare any of his consciousness for Beatrice's support. At this moment, this witch walking away before his eyes took priority. Because if he let her go here, if he couldn't see her again then. So, even if it was just for 1 second, the witch in front of him, that person he had to. Hey, is 1 second really that important? Suddenly, as if Subaru's desperation had caught her interest, that person squatted right in front of him and peered into his face. Resting her elbows on her folded knees, placing her small face on them, the witch tilted her head slightly. If that's the case. Seeing that, Beatrice's complexion changed. Stop it, I suppose. I'll multiply it by 1,000,000. Compress agony. Right after the witch hummed it like a song, Subaru's consciousness was enveloped in darkness. But, unable to understand what it was at first, Subaru would come to unravel it slowly, taking his time after all. A blank space of 1,000,000 seconds was brought upon Subaru by the hands of that person. God, Buddha, Lord Adlagna, I swear I will never rejoice over any success for the rest of my life. The Witch of Tristitia. That was the trump card Nicola used to repel the suddenly appearing Mad Prince, vague Adgard, and the spider's thread they all clung to in order to survive. Losing only a single leg was a stroke of luck. Fortunately, magic tools have advanced quite a bit since your era, Mr. Natsuki. Prosthetic legs aren't all that inconvenient, either. So smiled Nicola bravely, who had saved Subaru and the others at the cost of his left leg below the knee. Of course, one couldn't just laugh off the loss of a leg for someone still so young and take his words at face value. In exchange for his careful preparation, quick wit, and a future with an able body, Nicola had saved them all. While feeling deeply grateful for that, Subaru couldn't help but confirm something. The one fighting that Mad Prince was, yes, the Witch of Tristitia. As you saw, she is disaster incarnate, scattering danger in all directions. But there is exactly one thing about her that can be trusted based on objective facts, which is, that witch does not kill people. Hence why her retaliation only cost me a leg. People have meddled with the Witch of Tristitia's territory for various reasons, but I've never heard of anyone dying directly by her hands. There are those who died from mishandling the aftermath, but at that point, it falls into the realm of personal responsibility, relying not on the witch's personality or character, but strictly on deductions drawn from objective data and using that as his basis. That was very much like Nicola. Indeed, Nicola's prediction had hit the mark, and the Witch of Tristitia had not taken anyone's life. All that was taken was Nicola's leg, and 2 weeks of Subaru's time after being bathed in the authority of Witch of Tristitia. Just the number of days he had remained unconscious. Tell us, Nicola, I suppose, how exactly did you summon that person, the Witch of Tristitia, to that place? As I mentioned before, the Witch of Tristitia claims the Agzad Unparalleled Glacier as her territory. She essentially never interferes with outside events. But the sole exception is when someone meddles with her territory. She absolutely does not forgive that. She will identify the culprit and unfailingly retaliate. In other words, you intentionally messed with her territory to lure the witch out, I suppose? Well, that's the gist of it. I prepared a remotely activated spell formula designed to poke at her territory. Do you think I could sell this information as an emergency countermeasure? I'm impressed by your robust commercial spirit, but I highly doubt there are many situations where someone would need a witch to come save the day, in fact. Right. To be honest, that was specifically a countermeasure against the Mad Prince anyway. Nicola, wanting to prove the adage that one shouldn't get up empty-handed after a fall, seemed to realize the odds were against him and dejectedly withdrew his proposal. But that final added remark strongly caught Subaru's attention. Did you know that bastard was coming? I thought it might happen eventually. I didn't expect him to sniff us out this quickly, so failing to inform you was my blunder. Your blunder? I think you understand, but the Mad Prince, vague Adgard, possesses an extreme hatred for spirits. You could say he abominates them. Starting with the eradication of the spirit beast Oddglass, who was even called the loving mother of the holy kingdom of Gusteko, he has been slaughtering spirits all over the world. Oddglass, one of the 4 great spirits, just like Bubby, I suppose, to kill such a being. It's not limited to the spirit beast. The phantom killer of Kararagi was also killed, and Miss Arakia, who houses the stone lump, continues to be targeted. Even the great spirits, Miss Lumella's sisters. Huh? Amidst the listing of the Mad Prince's atrocities, Subaru and Beatrice's eyes widened greatly at what Nicola had unexpectedly let slip. Seeing their reaction, Nicola covered his mouth with his hand and closed his eyes, realizing his slip of the tongue. Keeping his hand there, he continued with an, "I'm sorry," and said, "Could you please pretend you didn't hear that just now? I promised Miss Lumella I wouldn't tell you to. There's no way we can do that, with the way you phrased it. Betty and Subaru have an obligation to hear this, I suppose. Lumella's sisters, the 5 other than Lumella, don't tell me. They have already passed away at the hands of the Mad Prince. All of them went into your rescue fully prepared for that. It was a secret they had agreed to keep, specifically to prevent Subaru and Beatrice from hearing it. Naturally, there was a high probability it was related to them. However, exactly how their lives had been spent was entirely outside the realm of imagination. The Grand Mogulade Geyser. Finding Betty and Subaru drifting on the underside of that isn't a simple task, in fact. It's like a colossal pool of mana, and to pluck out a single tiny black sphere from within it requires time, effort, and opportunity, I suppose. And, if great spirits were attempting such a thing, Anyone keeping an ear to the ground would sharply notice it immediately, in fact. To avoid interference, they'd have no choice but to lay down a decoy, I suppose. Don't tell me. That role was, to us, that was a natural decision to make, I suppose so. The deduction Beatrice was piecing together was corroborated by none other than the person involved. Bursting into the room where Subaru, Beatrice, and Nicola were talking, Lumella looked at Nicola, who had revealed the secret, with her red eyes in a helpless manner. "Oh, Lord Nicola, you truly do have loose lips, I suppose so. To not even grant the final request of my sisters, really now. I have no excuses. Well, I have known you since you were a baby, Lord Nicola, I suppose so. It cannot be helped that you would want to speak of my sister's valiant efforts no matter what, you see." Lumella's hand gently stroked Nicola's head as he looked down in depression. From that sight, their relationship appeared exactly as it looked, that of an older woman and a young boy. In truth, in places unknown to Subaru and Beatrice, the lives of Nicola and Lumella had intertwined, facing many twists and turns before reaching this present day, including the promise that Lumella's sisters would risk their lives to save them. Why? Why go that far? He couldn't help but demand an answer. Subaru knew it was wrong for him to think such things from the position of the one being saved. But this was crazy. It was wrong. The sheer magnitude of what was spent to save Subaru and Beatrice was far too disproportionate. Otto's descendants before Nicola, the Juculius domain that Lumella and her sisters oversaw. Even going further back, Emilia, who had encased herself in ice along with Al to prevent him from being killed. Far too much had been sacrificed for Subaru and Beatrice. For Lumella's sisters alone, 5 people had been sacrificed for that purpose. He couldn't just conveniently think that it was fine since they were spirits. Furthermore, even after struggling so much, dedicating time and lives, and going to such lengths to successfully rescue Subaru and Beatrice, there was no one else is here. He wasn't dexterous enough to rejoice at being thrown into such a world and left behind. Wanting to resist the sense of duty, the sense of mission, and the helplessness that washed over him whenever he closed his eyes, Subaru had desperately thrown himself into rehabilitation to find some meaning. But somewhere in his heart he had thought it. There's no meaning. So what if he could move, walk, and grasp things again? Move? For what purpose? Walk? Where exactly? Grasp? In this empty future. In a world where he could no longer meet or talk with many of the people precious to him. I want to see them. He wanted to see everyone. He wanted to see everyone right this instant. He wanted to exchange words with everyone he cared about. If he couldn't do that, then there was no point in being saved. Subaru, left to flow, tears streamed down his cheeks. Witnessing this and hearing his feeble mutterings, Beatrice wore an expression of deep sorrow, but immediately masked it with a face of affection, wiping away his tears. Even as they were wiped and wiped again, the tears kept flowing. As if to say that, just like Subaru and Beatrice being saved, wiping them away was utterly meaningless. God, Buddha, Lord Aud Lagna, I swear I will never deny someone's dream for the rest of my life. Ever since then, he had stopped his rehabilitation, reconnecting the wiring of his mind and body, breaking free from his disability, and treading the earth with his own feet. Living in this world 400 years later, this tomorrow's tomorrow he had arrived at, as his today. Such sugar-coated hopes were powerless before the despair of being forsaken by everything. Subaru, it's time to eat, I suppose. Betty will feed you, in fact. Beatrice scurried about, devotedly taking care of Subaru's personal needs after he had lost the will to move on his own. She had been trying to do everything she could for Subaru for a long time, but coupled with her innate clumsiness, things often didn't go very well. However, whether it was her sense of duty driving her, or the inconvenience of having no one to coddle her or rely on, ironically, unlike Subaru whose rehab showed no results, Beatrice's caregiving skills improved day by day, and she became able to handle Subaru with brisk efficiency. Morning and evening meals, sponge baths with hot water to wipe his body, stretching to bend and extend the muscles of his immovable limbs. Tasks that should have been heavy labor for Beatrice's small frame, yet she didn't utter a single complaint. On the contrary, once she perfectly completed each of those daily routines, "You did very well, I suppose. You're a good boy, Subaru." She would smile like that at the useless burden who did nothing at all. If this had been sarcasm or a spiteful remark toward a deadbeat, Subaru's heart might still have been saved. And naturally, there was not a single drop of malice contained in Beatrice's words. It was just Beatrice's pure concern for Subaru, and that only made his heart rot all the more. At night, no, not just at night, whenever he closed his eyelids, what he pictured was not this current world where everything had completely changed, but the centuries of the past he had left behind. Everything precious to Subaru was there. His precious friends, the mansion they had lived in together, the memories of laughing together, the problems they had agonized over, the future they had sworn to overcome. All of it was left behind there. He could see their smiles. He could hear their laughter. He could remember their warmth. Yet no one and nothing was there anymore. He couldn't touch them. He couldn't talk to them. He couldn't laugh with them. Subaru, he heard voices calling him. Various voices, numerous ways of addressing him. A myriad of emotions were calling out to Natsuki Subaru. Thinking poignantly of each and every one of them, Natsuki Subaru sank deeper. He thought that was fine. The reason to stand back up wasn't welling up inside him right now. I want to see them. He probably ought to stand up just to verify it. Even if he tried to throw it all away thinking no one and nothing was left, even if her figure wasn't within his reach, she alone still remained in this world. He probably ought to make the effort to stand up, using Amelia, using a reunion with her alone as his hope. He probably ought to struggle frantically, seeking only a reunion with Amelia, who had sealed herself in the permafrost to save Subaru and the others. He ought to. He truly ought to. He knew he ought to. But what if? Was Amelia even truly there, deep within the ice? What if? What if Amelia wasn't there? What if every last thing had been sacrificed just to keep Subaru and Beatrice alive? What if? What if it was a lie Nicola and the others had conspired to tell, just to give him a reason to live? What if, in reality, including Amelia, absolutely no one was left in this world anymore? What if he lost even that reason, if he confirmed that she wasn't there, what would happen to Subaru? What would Subaru, who everyone had paid every conceivable sacrifice to bring back to this land where no one remained, do? No one is here. Amelia, Rem, Ram, Otto, Garfield, that person, Frederica, Ryuzu, Meili, Roswell, Anaros, Clind, Reinhardt, Felt, Old Man Ram, Anastasia, Julius Krusch, Ferris, Wifilum, Al Schult, Abel, Medium, Flop, Tinza, Cecilis, Yorna, the Pleiades Battalion, the people of Shudrak. No one was here yet. No one is here. Is here. Then, what about that person? The unpronounceable name spilled out. He tried to revive the memory he couldn't recall. Crumbling, falling apart the moment he almost grasped it, making him want to doubt the anomaly that had arisen within him, making him want to doubt that he had even felt an anomaly at all. Did he even have a reason to feel an anomaly? What about that person anyway? That person. Why wouldn't it form a sound? It was incredibly frustrating. He needed the sound. To keep it in his memory. To convey it to someone else. It was that person. Remember it. Lock it in your head. Don't let it scatter anywhere. Just like forgetting a dream upon waking up, his brain tried to forget that person. If his brain was useless, he thought about carving it into his body. But before he could put strength into his fingernails, that person lost its outline, and he became unable to remember what he had tried to draw. Unnatural, unreasonable, absurd, incomprehensible, merciless, and irrational. Why couldn't Subaru keep that person in his memory? Gek! Gritting his teeth, he tried to resist the unnatural force, trying to make him forget that person. Even if he tried to split the name of that person, and to retain it in his memory, the moment he recognized them as parts of that person's name, whether he broke it apart or scattered it, it was deemed the same. Not being able to correctly call out that person was an inescapable rule set by the world. And things like that person, whose names could not be correctly recognized, were forgotten by the world. Just as Subaru, who knew and should have remembered that person, failed to realize he hadn't been correctly recognizing that person until he laid eyes on her. Surely, even if he forgot that person, he would feign ignorance and live another tomorrow having forgotten that person again. Don't fuck with me. Just how much do you think we've lost getting this far? How much have Natsuki, Subaru, and Beatrice lost to get here? My heart is already on the verge of shattering. It's covered in cracks and completely broken. Yet you still tell me to forget that person, to let go of that person, and live? If that's how you want to play it. Some unknown someone had laid down a rule while Subaru and the others were gone. A world where that compelling force naturally took effect. If he wanted to object, he should have been there. But since he couldn't, The rule was established without his knowledge. I see, I understand. Perfectly fine. Like hell I'm going to follow such a ridiculous rule, you idiot. That person, that person, that person, that person, that person. 1 second. If he forgot to think about that person for just 1 second, that 1 second would expand into 2 seconds, 2 seconds into 5, 5 seconds into 10, and the widening void would drive that person out of his head, making him forget like that, making it so it never happened. That was fate's modus operandi. If so, from now on, Natsuki Subaru wouldn't forget about that person for even a single second. For the rest of his life until he died, he would keep that person carved into the corner of his mind. He would eternally dedicate a part of Natsuki Subaru's heart to that person. That person had certainly existed. Even if they were called the Witch of Tristitia, treated as a disaster by everyone across the globe, and became an outrageous entity used as a trump card against the Mad Prince, who was considered the world's most terrifying. Before Natsuki Subaru and Beatrice, that person had certainly appeared. I'll do it again. Having broken countless times, forgotten countless times, thrown it all away countless times, been discouraged countless times, having resolved himself countless times, carved it in countless times, raised his face countless times, stood up countless times. Even if it was an idiotic, unlearned, clumsy, and unsightly way of walking, he would do it again. Beatrice. He moved his lips for the first time in a while. The dry, stuck skin of his lips tore and blood flowed. There was still no pain. The wiring between his brain and body remained unreconnected even now, but he would do it again. He had decided to do it. This time for real, even though it had taken so much time. That person is alive. Surely Amelia is too. So, I'm going to do my best. Sorry to keep you waiting. Repeating resolve and resignation over and over. A decision that lacked persuasiveness even to himself. Nevertheless, he said it. Casting aside shame and appearances, he said it. Because waiting is a given, I suppose. Betty is Subaru's partner, in fact. Because he knew Subaru's greatest partner would say exactly that. God, Buddha, Ad Lagna. I swear I will never push anyone's back for the rest of my life. 12 billion. 622,780,800 seconds. That was the result of converting 400 years into seconds. Through the authority of that person, who had become the Witch of Tristitia, Subaru had tasted, for just a brief moment, the terror of spending a long, long, idle expanse of time. 1 second multiplied by 1,000,000 is 1,000,000 seconds. Roughly calculated, 11.5 days. That was the 1,000,000 seconds Subaru had experienced. Converted into days, it seemed like it wasn't much time at all, which surprised him. Even though it had felt like walking through a pitch-black tunnel with no end in sight, and the 400 years that person had spent was roughly 12,000 times those 1,000,000 seconds. That, 12,000 times. Of course, they probably hadn't been days of nothingness. Indeed, the name of the Witch of Tristitia became known worldwide. People he knew passed away one after another, and eventually even kingdoms and city-states fell to ruin, leading up to the present. It was no exaggeration to say she had truly experienced a turbulent era. But I get it. None of that matters. Even if massive events that rewrote the world occurred in rapid succession, if they weren't things that moved her heart, no matter what happened, it was no different from a strong wind blowing outside the window. Thinking of it as one's own affair, accompanied by heat and a sense of reality. Only when one can taste those feelings does any experience truly become a part of one's life. A life unable to attain that is empty and tantamount to non-existence. Truly, hell on earth. That person had lived through that hell, with no dreams, no hopes, merely out of inertia. That long, long, nihilistic span of time had stripped away those sparkling things from her, molding her into that person as the Witch of Tristitia. Otherwise, there was no explaining her current state of being. And so, you're all telling me to do something about it, aren't you? Saying that, Subaru straightened the collar of the clothes he had changed into with his own hands and tied his shoelaces tightly. It had taken an absurd amount of time to reconnect the wiring of his mind and body until he could speak, move his hands as he pleased, and stand up to walk. The length of time he had spent rotting away, and the time he had spent on rehabilitation. Even so, the time Subaru spent, possessing a strong purpose and a goal he had to achieve, was vastly more salvational than the 400 years that person must have spent. He wanted to deliver that salvation he was given to that person as well. Mr. Natsuki, are you ready? Fully prepared, as Subaru sentimentally gazed at the room he had spent quite a long time in, Nicola's voice, which he had grown fully accustomed to hearing, called out to his back. Turning around, the man standing there with his prosthetic leg he had long since mastered was the same man from when they met. Gentle, somewhat unreliable looking, yet capable of accomplishing monumental tasks. The man who had steadily advanced his own life forward even while Subaru was rotting away. I'm ready. Really, I've been relying on you for absolutely everything. This debt, I told you quite a while ago that that's unnecessary. I was sufficiently saved the moment we managed to fish up you and Miss Beatrice. Therefore, there are no debts. No, I'm paying it back. Even if you refuse, your grandpa's grandpa's grandpa. Anyway, my buddy wouldn't forgive me if I didn't repay my debts. I mean, I figured it out. Figured what out? Why that guy left behind such an unreasonable tradition to pull me and Biko back up, spanning all the way down to his descendants. Was it his oversight that he didn't explicitly write down the specific reason? Or was there another reason? He was unexpectedly careless at times, so the former wasn't impossible. But considering the phenomena surrounding that goal, perhaps he simply couldn't put it into words. Even so, actions sometimes convey intent more clearly than words. What Otto Suin had entrusted to Natsuki Subaru by passing it down through his descendants. Please save that person, Mr. Natsuki, that is. When you think of it that way, all sorts of gears violently click into place. Sure, the story that everyone tried to save me is super moving. But they must have also thought of the possibility that the me who emerged after they were all gone would be a spineless, empty husk of a soul. And yet, nobody did that. Each and every one of them never gave up on pulling Natsuki Subaru back up, because there was something Natsuki Subaru had to come back and do. Subaru had to save that person, whom they couldn't save themselves. It was for that purpose that everyone who lived in that era created such a massive debt for Subaru. Surely for the sake of that person, who had offered a greater sacrifice than anyone else. Even so, it's a troublesome mechanism, a curse, a system, a bullshit rule. No one can leave anything about that person behind. They can't record her. They can't speak of their memories of her. But you remember her, Mr. Natsuki. And so does Miss Beatrice. That's a given. After all, her life as a single girl was twisted, turning her into an outrageous thing like a witch. I have to take responsibility. So much so that unless he dedicated his life to it, the scales wouldn't balance. At the answer bearing Subaru's resolve, Nicola stroked the unfitting beard he had grown on his chin and laughed. It was right after they exchanged that banter. Lord Natsuki Subaru, our preparations over here are boilingly complete, I suppose so. Both Lady Beatrice and I are in scorchingly perfect form, I suppose so. Hey, you're making too much noise, I suppose. And why are you explaining Betty's condition without permission, in fact? Also, learn to adjust your temperature already, I suppose. You're hot. At the two large and small shadows that noisily burst in, Subaru exchanged glances with Nicola, then let out a smile he couldn't contain. Catching sight of the two inside the room, Lumella put a hand to her mouth with an "Oh my, Lord Nicola. Are you feeling well today? I had heard that you haven't been going outside much lately, I suppose so." "That's true, but not coming to see you off today would be a lie. One who cannot find a chance for victory cannot seize a chance for business." From the sayings of Hoshin, though it's completely fallen out of use nowadays. Good words are simply good words, I suppose so. My blazing, wonderful master also cherished such words from the one he served, you see. The sayings of Hoshin had fallen out of use, but in the exchange between the two who cherished those obsolete words, the scenes of the past and the people who were there naturally revived in his mind. However, those nostalgic, sentimental feelings were sealed away for now. "But, Lumella, are you really coming with us? It's definitely going to be a nasty fight, you know." My, are you worried about me, Lord Natsuki Subaru, is that so? If so, that's all the more reason I should be there, you know. Because to avenge your sisters? No, that's incorrect, I suppose so. Because if it were my master, he definitely would have fought alongside you here, Lord Natsuki Subaru. So I will do the same, I suppose so. Damn it, that bastard, going off ahead to a place where I can't even directly complain to him or punch him. Foo. That is what it means to be the finest, I suppose so. With a thump, she struck her bountiful chest, boasting of the man who wasn't here more than anyone else. Though she differed completely in appearance, personality, attitude, and everything else, feeling the exact same reliability from Lumella as he did from the finest of knights, she ceaselessly revered as her master was a strange sensation. Actually, having Lumella here is a tailwind, I suppose. Besides, if the expected clash occurs anyway, that man will absolutely butt in fact. Then it's better for everyone if we make it an all-out war, huh? Geez, we just want to focus on our important assigned role, but it's all because my Biko is too popular. You don't need to worry. That man has properly locked onto Subaru, who won Betty's heart too, I suppose. We're matching in being targeted, in fact. That's great. If we're being targeted together, I won't have to suspect Biko of cheating, right? Nkya. Beatrice let out a surprised cry as she was unexpectedly hoisted up and placed on his shoulders. However, quickly resting her hands on Subaru's head, she let out a deeply moving sigh at the fact that Subaru had regained enough physical strength to do such a thing. Subaru made no mention of the sigh hitting the top of his head. He had caused Beatrice so much worry and trouble that no matter how much he thanked her, it wouldn't be enough, and no matter how many words of gratitude he exhausted, they would fall short. He had made her wait a truly long time, and finally, from here this is where it begins. What is this? So gloomy. The air has the humidity of marching to one's death. Do you lot understand the meaning of me lending out my 9 divine generals? Do you? With Beatrice still on his shoulders, accompanied by Nicola and Lumella, Subaru stepped outside the house, only to find His Excellency, the Emperor of Unification for the Volotchian Empire, waiting for them, widening his eyes with an O at the sight of her coming all this way directly. Leaving the royal palace behind, Subaru said, "Are you sure you should be here? I heard you were pretty busy. Something about figuring out the stronghold of those guys trying to overthrow the empire or whatever? Fool. The moment I figured out that much, there's no way there'd be any issues if I took command. Overusing only specific individuals runs the risk of alienating one's subordinates. It's even recorded that Vincent Valacchia was lacking in that regard and was frequently followed up by the Empress. That's wild. It's recorded for posterity that he was cold-blooded and totally whipped by Miss Medium. If he knew, the wrinkles between his brows would probably never smooth out. Regardless of whether he was respected or not, if he was useful even as a negative example for the reigns of his descendants, Abel could probably rest in peace. He could easily picture him crossing his arms with that sour look, snorting, with a blank expression. Flanking the young emperor who spoke of the former emperor's shame were the 2 frequently overused individuals she had just mentioned, Arakia and Madeline. The 2 of them had often been made to accompany her to Subaru's place, perhaps out of consideration to show them familiar faces. But this time the circumstances were different. To think that, even though I asked knowing it was a long shot, you'd actually let us rent the 9 divine generals. Naturally, it's because there's a benefit for us as well. If you can remove the issue of that Agzad unparalleled glacier, the path to the Holy Kingdom of Gusteco, a long-standing nuisance, will open up. With the spirit beast dead and the influence of the Gusteco Holy Church low, we cannot leave that country as it is right now. If that happens, it'll be the birth of the super-unified Empire Valacchia that conquered the entire world, And then, I shall leave my name in history as the super emperor who achieved world unification. Had it not been for illness, that honor would have belonged to my mother. How unlucky. For someone who hates gloomy talk, you're the one who brought it up, I suppose. Watch your mouth. Just because you're cute doesn't mean I am as lenient as my mother. Such words held no persuasiveness when she wasn't going to punish Beatrice in the end anyway. That was blatantly obvious not only to Subaru and Beatrice, but also to the 2 9 divine generals flanking the Emperor herself. I'm genuinely grateful for your cooperation, but you'll have to follow my orders, all right? Because I have no intention of killing that person, the Witch of Tristitia, I heard, reckless and stupid. But I'll follow, because it's an order? No, I don't dislike that witch either. With few words, Arakia promised her cooperation with the best possible answer. Returning a smile to that answer, Subaru looked toward the other one, Madeline. Madeline, what about the thing I asked you for? You really only ever ask of friggin' unreasonable things of this dragon. Did you seriously friggin' think it would be useful? Whether it's useful or not, I think things just won't be complete without them. It's a class reunion to bring that person back. The more familiar faces, the better. Sigh, I went through a lot of friggin' trouble, but I did find them. Really? That's amazing. Putting her hand on her hip and sighing heavily, Madeline's reply made him jump up involuntarily. Honestly, regarding this, it was an even bigger long shot than renting the 9 divine generals. In fact, he wasn't even certain in the first place. It was likely related to that person. It wasn't clearly specified in the records. It was information noted in a forbidden book, sealed in a certain land in the kingdom of Lugunica, the ruins of Roswell L. Mathers's mansion. The true identity of a certain person Subaru also knew, his whereabouts unknown now, 400 years later. Subaru had entrusted the search for his tracks to Madeline, betting on the sliver of a possibility that she, being in the same position, might be able to find him. That's quite impressive, in fact. Betty will pat your head later, I suppose. I don't friggin' need it. Stop friggin' treating this dragon like a child. Neither this dragon nor you are friggin' children or anything of the sort. True. An 800-year-old drill loli and a 400-year-old horned loli. That's also a friggin' unpleasant expression, but it might be friggin' useless even if you ask them. Huh? This dragon thinks they've lost their spine and are completely friggin' useless. Crossing her arms, Madeline prefaced her words while narrowing her golden eyes. Clearly conveying even things that were hard to say was her strength as a dragonkin, and behind that consideration lay the compassion that had sprouted from living long in human society. At the same time, Subaru could guess just how much despair the person who made Madeline call them useless must be in. No, that's something only we can understand. So, Biko and I will go. We will go, in fact. Subaru and Betty are always together, I suppose. Yeah. Beatrice on his shoulders and Subaru fist bumped each other with both hands. Witnessing that, Madeline shrugged her shoulders and offered no further dissenting opinions. Confirming that, Subaru took a deep breath in and exhaled. Taking the silent, cold, clear air into his lungs, he slightly cooled his heated body and slowly turned back to look at his friends behind him. Everyone who had rescued Subaru and Beatrice, who had merely drifted for 400 years, a long, long time, and given them the grace to dedicate all their strength to what they had to do. Nicola, yes. Lumella, I suppose so. Rosalind, I shall reply on her behalf. Arakia. Madeline, I'm friggin' listening. Biko, Beatrice. Of course, I'm here, in fact. Looking at everyone's faces in turn, hearing everyone's replies in turn, storing everyone's reliability in his chest in turn, Subaru exhaled heavily. He had left many things behind. He had parted with many people. That was frustrating. It was sad. It was still painful even now. But his hands that had once become empty were not strong enough to remain empty. No, that's not right. I was never alone all this time. It was just Subaru rotting away, feeling as though he had become alone. Beatrice was here, Nicola and the others were here. Surely Amelia was waiting for him, and they were making that person wait for them to come get her. Let's go, for the sake of us being us. God Buddha, Adlagna. I swear I will never what I have for the rest of my life. And so, the story returned to the moment at the unparalleled glacier from the very beginning. I'm taking you back. Bring it on, oh inevitable fate. To blow away the chilling wind, the unsettlingly toxic swell of mana waves, and all such elements of anxiety, Subaru shouted as loudly as he could. Despite having that intense emotion directed at her, the profile of the Witch of Tristitia did not waver in the slightest. And as his opening confession met with swift failure, 6 seconds. Stomping hard on the white-stained earth, closing the distance in an instant, the mad prince raised both of his arms. Grasped in those arms were 2 cursed swords, and the sword gale unleashed a split second later would surely attempt to cleave Subaru, that person, and everyone else all at once. Whatever that person could do, it would be difficult for Subaru and Beatrice, who were already using EMM, to defend against it. Therefore, unfortunately, I would ask that you struggle just a little longer, a demand. Instantly, the thunder roaring across the ground turned into a lightning explosion head-on, assaulting the mad prince. Bursting light spread shockwaves in all directions, and even Subaru's eyes could see the frozen earth radially cracking and shattering. For a moment he feared it might reach his own feet, but immediately judged such worry unnecessary, because there's no way the perfect butler would make a blunder like that. A tremendously honorable evaluation, Master Subaru. And to add to that, my gratitude. A great debt. A great debt is an exaggeration. I'm the one who should be thanking you for coming, Mr. Klein. In Subaru's field of vision as he said that, showing his slender, lithe back, stood a blue-haired man with handsome features, Klein. One of the people who knew the past from 400 years ago, an old acquaintance who had survived into this era, and now a dragonkin with 2 black horns sprouting from his blue-haired head. He had vanished 400 years ago, and by entrusting the search to Madeline, hoping she might find him if they were fellow dragonkin. He was the final piece whose whereabouts they had finally managed to uncover. I made a grave mistake, desiring her resolve and the future far too much. I failed to notice her true intention of paying a massive price. Bitter regret. Quietly spun from Clin's lips was the reason why a man of his caliber had not stood on the front stage for 400 years, nor had he cooperated with Nicola and the others in their search for Subaru, but had instead spent a long time in despair. From the fragmentary testimony of Klein, who was tormented by strong regrets within memories that still had many missing pieces, Subaru saw through to the despair he had tasted, and realized it was closely tied to the current situation where that person had become the Witch of Tristitia. Perhaps he, too, had prepared himself for death. However, I dedicate my regrets and my sorrow to you, this time for sure. Golden eyes harboring resolve, surging purple lightning clad around his entire body. The existence of a dragonkin, who had connected his life to this era, lent his strength to the wishes and prayers of Subaru and the others. A dragonkin, huh? You dragons clad in dragon carapaces and dragon halos are, in a broad sense, possessors of mana bodies just like spirits. However, I do not consider you to be my direct enemies. I do not. A flash of purple lightning, receiving the strike clad in Klein's lightning head-on. The Mad Prince merely caught it with the crossed hilts of his cursed swords, resulting only in him being pushed far back. His unfathomable power surpassed even that of a dragonkin with extraordinary strength. But it wasn't out of confidence in that gap in power. The Mad Prince did not view his opponents with such easy-to-understand calculation or arrogance. That was a crystal-clear fact to Subaru, who had had the opportunity to clash with his vicious blades time and time again over the safety of Beatrice, Lumella, and the others since their worst first encounter. As if to prove it, checking the feel of the cursed swords in his hands, the Mad Prince furrowed his brows with the same expressionless face he showed no matter who his opponent was. Even so, you will fight? It goes without saying. A golden rule, I see. A pity, truly a pity. I will have you disappear, regrettably. In a flash, the lightning explosion and the light explosion clashed on the ground, and a tremendous blast pressure that drowned out, even the sound swelled, from within the unparalleled ice glacier that had become their battlefield, reshaping the world that had remained unchanged for hundreds of years. It was the opening of a transcendent battle that would shake the trends of the world for the first time in centuries. Is it okay to just leave that alone? Suddenly asking that was that person, gazing at the battle from a distance. She narrowed her pale blue-green eyes languidly, and with an attitude that suggested she wasn't particularly interested, asked Subaru about Klein and the Mad Prince's battle. For a moment, Subaru was nearly taken aback by her careless approach. But, it's fine. This is all going according to plan, too. Is that so? But that Dragonkin guy can't beat Mr. Mad Prince, right? I think it's only a matter of time before he gets beaten. As expected, you have a good eye. But it's fine. Very soon, reinforcements will arrive, I suppose. No sooner had she spoken than shadows fiercely intruded from all four sides into the battle of offense and defense unfolding on the ice between Klein and the Mad Prince. A great spirit of red hair cloaked in flames rising from her entire body, the Diamond Princess extending the contradictory armament of glittering diamond light bands from her body, and the Flying Dragon General deploying the dragon carapace of the Cloud Dragon into real combat for the first time in ages, realizing a coordinated attack of herself ex herself. With the current world's absolute top-class fighters all assembled, the battle heated up by 1 or 2 degrees. Sure, with that, they might last a little bit longer. But everyone over there looks like they're Mr. Mad Prince's targets, right? Mr. Mad Prince is the type to get stronger and stronger the more he fights. So, isn't your plan a mistake? What? Did I say something weird? No. Hearing words like targets or type coming from your mouth just made my chest feel all warm. In response to that person's assessment, Subaru voiced his honest feelings. Immediately, she looked at him as if she were looking at something creepy, but he couldn't help it. The deep emotion he felt was genuine. However, at the same time, that person's tactical evaluation was correct. To begin with, the Mad Prince was a monster far beyond the norm, not just in his existence, but in the talents he was given. Not only did he adapt to any situation or environment with the divine protection of adaptation, but the divine protection of solitude permanently increased his solo combat abilities. The divine protection of repetition exponentially refined the same movements within a fight, and the divine protection of fortitude which normally only activated on the verge of death, was constantly activating due to the one-of-a-kind bug of him being a spirit human whose heart didn't beat. He was the possessor of all these multiple divine protections, creating a synergistic explosion of jackpot blessings. That was one fraction of the true nature of the Mad Prince's overwhelming combat power. Reinhard was a pretty ridiculous cheat, and Cece and Halibel were also ridiculous, but that guy is still on that exact same level of cheat. What's your point? So you're saying you know you can't win? Look, if you're going to commit suicide, I'd like you to do it somewhere else. I live here, and I'm not looking for free time. It's not suicide, we came here to win. It's true that if things stay like this, we'll lose. But, if you lend us your strength, it's a different story, in fact. At those words from Beatrice, who was holding hands with Subaru, that person furrowed her brows in suspicion. Even with her brows furrowed, the witch whose beauty did not diminish in the slightest muttered emotionlessly, "I don't get it. And, why would I do such a thing? I am the witch of Tristitia. Do you know what that means? No one can subordinate me, and no one can order me around. That's the kind of existence I am, or perhaps." That person cut her words short, sending a sidelong glance so alluring it sent a shiver down his spine. That this movement wasn't born from positive emotions was obvious looking at the crimson scorpion beside that person, which refused to leave her side just as Beatrice nestled close to Subaru. The crimson scorpion's compound eyes glared piercingly, as if determined to protect the witch of Tristitia, whom no one was supposed to be able to infringe upon, from all calamities, even at the cost of its own life. Did someone ask you to protect that person? What's that about? No, just my imagination. My memories are a mess, but I just thought it'd be nice if that were the case. Since a while ago, no, from the very beginning, I haven't understood a single thing you've been saying. It's the same for the child with you, you strange old man. Dissatisfaction, displeasure, incomprehension. Perhaps it was a mix of many things. Her words, still low tension as usual, yet carrying a faint trace of emotion, were nonetheless a harsh strike that pierced deeply into Subaru right now. Subaru, with his hand opposite the one holding Beatrice's, stroked his completely white hair. Being treated as a strange old man hurts. I still feel young at heart, is it no good? I even trimmed my beard, like this, out of respect for the Wilhelm I admire. To Betty, any version of Subaru is handsome, filled with a charm that is hard to express in a single word and hard to say would appeal to everyone, I suppose. Thanks for the follow-up that couldn't quite follow up. It was an evaluation he couldn't just honestly rejoice over, but he didn't doubt there were no lies in it. Otherwise, for the 40 years spent preparing to accomplish what they had to do, there was no way she could have continued to support him without leaving his side for even a moment. He couldn't find any answer other than love, and there was no need to find one. Love, huh? Right, that's right. There's no other reason to try this hard after all. You? It was long, those 40 years. But you know, even that was only 1,262,278,800 seconds. Not even a tenth of the time spent. Really, truly, you know. The authority of the Witch of Tristitia, even with that power of compression deduced, after discussing it with Beatrice, the actual time experienced could not be fully crushed. The 400 years that person lived made the hellish days Subaru tasted, tormented by remorse and self-punishment, seem like a span of time one would want to scoff at. That was what had worn down that person's heart. Why did you wear yourself down that much? Pay absolutely everything as a price up to this point, sacrifice all your possibilities, and still arrive at this now. What are? Why? Stop it. Don't call me in that unintelligible way. Suddenly, the expression of the Witch of Tristitia crumbled, and she took a large step back. Acting on reflex, that person readied her right hand, preparing to snap her fingers and activate her authority. The non-lethal authority of the Witch of Tristitia that drove opponents away with the elapsed subjective time it inflicted, without taking their lives. Do it, try compressing me. Cake! Don't say it so easily. Do you honestly think you can withstand it? That's impossible. Anything that can withstand this isn't human. 400 years is a long time. I know, in fact. Betty knows. The 400 years that person spent and the 400 years Betty spent are different, but even so, I surely know the loneliness that exists in similar places, I suppose. Beatrice, too, had spent an unfathomable amount of time in the Forbidden Library, and she knew that those empty days, which seemed to have no end, did end, and there was a day of liberation. Betty wants that person to understand that too, in fact. You have the right to receive it, I suppose. No, I want you to receive it, in fact. Why? Hesitating over whether to aim her readied fingers at Subaru or Beatrice, the witch of Tristitia, showing emotions she had hidden all this time, asked them. The sorrowful witch who, in the process of casting absolutely everything aside, had no choice but to let go of even her reasons, because I want you to be happy. Because all of us think so. All of us, I do, Natsuki Subaru does, Betty does, Beatrice does, Emilia does, Frederica does, Otto does, Garfield does, Ram does, Riswell does, Ryuzu does, Meili does, Spica does, Anaros does, Klein does, the people of Arlem Village do, the people of Kostul do, our family does, our friends do, we do, Betty and everyone else does. Everyone does. Her breath hitched, and that person's cheeks stiffened. Surely not a single one was a name that person recognized. He knew the reason. Just as it had been for Subaru, that person herself would completely forget the many people connected to her if she didn't think of them for a single second. Repeating that, she had worn it all completely away. Honestly, when Subaru started saying he just had to keep thinking about that person, somewhere in his head forever, I thought it was completely reckless, I suppose. You think so? It's no big deal. Just dedicating one spot in my head to that person. Indeed. Nodding to each other, they looked once again at that person, who had a severe look in her eyes. Subaru and Beatrice had answered the why she had uttered. Now all that was left, you answer us too. To the why from earlier. The one from earlier. Why did that person go as far as becoming a witch, going as far as being called a disaster, defending this place from multitudes of people, and overcoming 400 years of emptiness, I suppose? At Beatrice's broken-down question, that person gasped and could say nothing. Facing her, Subaru took one step forward, letting go of Beatrice's hand. A small hand softly pushed Subaru's back as he did so. One step, then another, he moved forward. The distance with that person, who had stepped back once, closed. The Crimson Scorpion forced its way between Subaru and that person. It was as if to say it was determined to protect that person from absolutely every calamity that might harm her, even if it meant sacrificing itself. But, thanks for doing what we couldn't do all this time. Saying that, Subaru stroked its carapace. The claws it had raised on both hands were lowered, and with a sluggish movement, the Crimson Scorpion yielded the path to Subaru. At the Crimson Scorpion's actions, that person widened her eyes with a face as if she had been betrayed. It was an honor. If she felt betrayed by the Crimson Scorpion moving aside here, then my doing this must have a proper meaning to you. Huh? Standing right in front of her, close enough to touch if he reached out, Subaru made that person's eyes waver. She was beautiful. Compared to the fading, nearly vanishing memories Subaru had of that person, the woman before him had become much more of an adult, her beauty standing out far more than her adorability. Even in her choice of dress and how she wore it, and the way she set her hair, she had a sense of style that was a pure mass of fashion, despite showing it to no one, which was very much like that person. Even after 400 years, without changing those parts, remaining unchanged, she was here. That was 'cause you wanted to see us? To see me, right? Ah, that horse breath was the final resistance the Witch of Tristitia, feared by the entire world, could muster. With an outstretched hand, he pulled her slender body closer, and Subaru embraced that person against his chest. With a twitch, that person's body trembled as if frightened. Yet, the feverish that person did not try to push away Subaru's aged body, which would have easily shattered if pushed. However, she didn't hug him back, either. That wasn't her rejection, but she sacrificed even that, in fact. Sacrificing even the right to embrace someone. That person had desperately yearned for this future. Why? Why had she? Natsuki Subaru had no choice but to force the answer upon her. To tell her that, wanting to see Natsuki Subaru, that person had endured the emptiness for 400 years, and that emptiness, that long emptiness of 400 years, was ending now. I am. It's fine. If you can't hug someone, then I'll just hug you. If you can't call my name, I'll call yours. If you can't cry in front of people, I'll let you bury your face in my chest like this. If you can't eat what you like, I'll make you as many new things you like as you want. If you can't hold anyone's hand, I'll overlap mine with yours. If you can't show your weaknesses to anyone, I'll praise your strength for 400 years' worth. What she could do, what she wanted to do, her future, hopes, and possibilities. The qualifications to become the Witch of Tristitia had stripped many things from that person. In order to gain and grasp that possibility, that person couldn't even wish for it herself anymore. But it's going to be all right. Subaru is a genius at unilaterally caring for others, unilaterally imagining their feelings, and unilaterally trying to make them happy, in fact. And that's how I won Biko over too. You fall prey to it too. Okay. Subaru gently lifted the body he was hugging, looking at her surprised face up close. In her eyes, contrary to the emotions welling up, no tears formed. She no longer even held the right to shed tears in front of someone. What possibilities, hopes, or futures did she have left? But at the very least, she hadn't sacrificed the right to look at him with reddened cheeks and moist eyes. I don't get it. You guys, all of you, make no sense. With a trembling voice, the witch of Tristitia, who had been caught by a mere human, spilled those words. The witch who could reduce any disaster, pain, or hardship to a mere split second by compressing it, trembled her lips, praying that she never wanted to lose or let go of this single moment, even though it makes no sense. And yet, the witch of Tristitia, the witch, that person, smiled with moist eyes, as if to confirm the emotions welling up within her, the emotions she had refused to let go of. It seems I love you. It's weird, isn't it? No, not at all, I suppose. Had she been prepared to be rejected? To have the love she voiced accepted without a single moment of hesitation, that person widened her eyes. Devoid of any witch-like quality, a smile spilled onto a face that just looked like a normal village girl's. I guess you're way too beautiful for just a village girl. You probably say that to anyone. Even if I did, it'd only be to a village girl who is way too beautiful to be a village girl. I don't think there are many who fit that description. As far as I know, there's only one. Is that so? Then I guess it's fine. Hearing Subaru's answer, that person turned her face away with a sulking attitude. Finding that endearing, Subaru let out a heavy sigh and, "Say, is it okay if I put you down? My lower back is in a bit of trouble. Are you saying I'm heavy? No, you're like fluff. But I'm an old man past 60. I'm not totally decrepit, but even looking at it favorably, I'm pretty frail." Understood. Having received her consent, he slowly lowered that person to the ground. Then, immediately, Beatrice ran over and nimbly settled into Subaru's arms instead. Seeing that person's eyes turned sharp once again. I can't, but that child can? You can tell just by looking, right? Our Biko is a spirit, so she's true fluff. I am fluff, in fact. Perfectly in sync. Whatever. Turning her face away from Subaru and Beatrice, that person slowly started walking. She stroked the back of the little crimson scorpion that had moved to the side, and softly condemned it with a traitor. Then she shot a quick glance toward the legendary, fierce battle still raging on even during this exchange. It's gotten extremely dangerous without us noticing, but you wanted me to help, right? Yeah, I want to make that vague guy stay quiet around here for a long time. And there are lots of things I want to borrow your strength for after that too. You plan to just use me whenever it's convenient for you? The type who doesn't feed the fish they've caught? I'm the type who wants to say, I love you every day if I can. Is that so? I won't get my hopes up then. Waving her hand flutteringly, swaying her reddish-brown hair down her back and her large ribbon, that person, accompanied by the crimson scorpion, prepared to leap into the battlefield. Subaru narrowed his eyes at that ribbon, which stimulated his memories as if he were deeply accustomed to seeing it. Petra, there's another girl I love deep inside this glacier. Will you help me dig her out later? Drop dead, idiot. Unclear how serious she was. That person threw those words back, stuck her tongue out, and headed to the battlefield. Scratching his head at the sight, Subaru exhaled. Then, from within his chest, Beatrice poked Subaru's solar plexus with her fist. Even if you were trying to make her relax, you're far too terrible at it, I suppose. Maybe I was. Are my prized, witty remarks getting left behind by the flow of time? I wouldn't know, in fact. But we got to talk to that person. Everything starts from here, I suppose. We can't ruin it, in fact. At Beatrice's words, carrying the strong heat of hope, Subaru held his breath and nodded. Right, that's right. From here, everything starts from here. Subaru and the others had finally merely stood at the starting line. Crossing 400 years of time, spending 40 years finally at the starting line of the current world. Betty will also join the fray, I suppose. Subaru, are you ready, in fact? Of course. The teamwork we've matured over 40 years, and the 12 original magics we've devised, are gonna breathe fire. They'll breathe fire, I suppose. Raising a spirited cry, Subaru and Beatrice also dashed fiercely toward the battlefield. Thunderclad and roaring purple lightning echoed, Flames with firepower like the end of the world raged. A massive storm of diamonds violently rampaged, as if the earth itself were raging. And amidst the downpour of the dragon's divine punishment, dropping hundreds of tons of clouds at will. In that combat zone, the most terrifying monster on earth clashed with the Witch of Tristitia leading her witch beast. Into that fray dashed an old man past 60, holding a small, adorable spirit. It was undeniably a life-threatening challenge, and yet, compared to those 400 years of emptiness, sacrificing my life is nothing to be afraid of. Running, 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 he continued to run. Not to leave behind the things they ended up leaving behind, or the things they ended up letting go of. They were entrusted with it. It was handed to them. They were expected, prayed for, and wished upon. Together with everyone who was definitely there, they ran through this irreplaceable now. Even if it wasn't the ideal future they had once wished for, Natsuki Subaru, together with his beloved friends, would live in this different world. God, Buddha, Lord Adlagna, I swear I will never forget that I loved for the rest of my life. Sacrificing life in another world from zero.